Chapter 8:19. The director of Mango TV liked to play with twists and turns. Just now, the bright color of the host's clothes and the dim light of the dancing demons came to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit was still standing on the stage, feeling the enthusiastic cheers of the audience. The music suddenly became cheerful. It was very much like the soundtrack of a girl's anime. Poplar Fruit had never heard it before, but he tactfully stepped to the side, because below was Kiki's stage. The change in music was suddenly unacceptable to many of the audience, because there was a huge contrast between Poplar Fruit's coldness and the happy music now mixed with many cute cat calls. Wow! Before Poplar Fruit turned around, he heard the audience burst into even louder cheers. Under the guidance of a staff member, Kiki's little head poked out from the backstage screen, her two little braids looking very beautiful. When she came out again, everyone saw the complete appearance of this fairy-like my daughter. There was no doubt that she was beautiful and exquisite. Moreover, Chichi's rather anime-style student uniform paired with her little skirt looked absolutely adorable. Coupled with the little pink magic wand in her hand and the cute little wings on her shoes, she was like a combination of the moon hair in Sailor Moon and the transformed Sakura in Sakura Sakura. She was so cute that the boys and girls in the audience who came from that era couldn't help but howl. The little girl seemed to be frightened by the tsunami-like cheers. She opened her little mouth, looked left and right, and wanted to shrink back. Kiki. Poplar Fruit quickly clapped his hands and called out to Kiki. The little girl saw her father and stopped turning around. Her big eyes looked at her father, and she ran over happily. However, the stage was a mess. The music went on for a while, but Kiki didn't care about the show and threw herself into her father's arms. Poplar Fruit felt a little guilty. Kiki's performance wasn't good, but he didn't blame his daughter. Asking a little girl who was not even 2 years old to perform on the catwalk in such a big event was simply asking for too much. However, no one would blame Kiki for not cooperating. The audience below the stage laughed. It was a kind and loving laughter. Let's welcome Poplar Fruit, who is stepping on the stage of Happy Camp for the first time. Teacher, he smiled and brought the 5 hosts up from the side. Of course, this is also Poplar Fruit's first time on a variety show in our country. Applause. Poplar Fruit hugged Kiki and humbly bowed to Teacher he and the rest, and the audience below the stage, to thank them. Politeness is not something that only celebrities from South Korea know. This is an excellent tradition that has been passed down for thousands of years in China. However, it is becoming less and less seen on television nowadays. After the greetings, Teacher he introduced everyone to Kiki, who wasn't necessarily any less famous than Poplar Fruit. Then, he said to Kiki, "Kiki, can you say hi to everyone?" Poplar Fruit held the microphone and faced Kiki. He smiled and said, "Come, Kiki, say a few words like how you introduce yourself to other children." In her father's arms, Kiki not only calmed down, but she also became bolder. She lowered her head and looked at the huge microphone in front of her. It seemed to be much bigger than her mouth. She said in a childish voice, My name is Yang Luochi. Daddy calls me Kiki." At this time, Sister Na stood up and held Kiki's little hand. She smiled and asked, "Kiki, why did you suddenly run to your father just now? Why didn't you walk out on the catwalk like your father?" Kiki raised her head and looked at Sister Na. She recognized that she was the big sister who played with her very happily yesterday, even though her hair was dyed. Kiki said without hesitation, "Because Kiki is scared." "Ha." The audience laughed heartily and fell to the ground. Poplar Fruit explained, "I came out first just now. She didn't see me, so Kiki is not scared now. Why don't we give Kiki another chance?" Wu Xin, who liked Kiki very much, suggested with a smile. "That's right. Let Kiki do it again." Fatty Haitao also laughed happily. The audience below the stage clapped loudly. They all supported this suggestion and then cheered for Kiki. Everyone's eyes were on Kiki. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Teacher," he pushed his hand and motioned for him to put the microphone to his mouth. Poplar Fruit asked, "Kiki, do it again, okay? Dad is by your side." Miraculously, not only did Kiki not have stage fright, but she also nodded under her father's encouragement. "Okay. Teacher, he held the microphone and waved his hand coolly. He said, "Let's ask our sound engineer to put the background music aside. Kiki, you can do it." Poplar Fruit didn't let Kiki come out from the backstage. Instead, he let her start from the middle of the stage. The little beauty waving the magic wand stood on the ground again. Everyone burst into applause. Poplar Fruit stood not far away from her with a smile, giving her support and confidence. Many of the audience below the stage were attracted by Kiki. Only the audience in the TV behind the stage noticed Poplar Fruit's warm and caring smile because of the sharp camera. Was this still the cold and handsome long-legged man who made all the girls cry just now? The proud Wolf King was as warm as a little sun. Perhaps any girl would wish to have such a handsome and loving father. The camera zoomed back to Chichi's first official catwalk. Chichi began her first official catwalk. The little girl raised her head just like her father and boldly looked at the audience below the stage. Her small steps were very steady as she walked forward in a catwalk. She really looked like a model. The boys below the stage grabbed their cheeks and howled as if they had the heart of a young girl. Chichi walked to the front of the stage and Yang Guo carefully followed her. He softly said to her, "We're here." He was worried that his daughter wouldn't pay attention to where she was walking and would miss a step and fall. Thankfully, Kiki heard her father's voice and stood steadily 1 meter away from the edge of the stage. The little girl waved her magic wand and naughtily tapped it in the air. It would create a magic effect later. Then, she mimicked a kitten and scratched her cheek with her empty left hand. She even blinked her big eyes. Although she didn't smile, the smile in her eyes couldn't be concealed. Kiki's eyes were big and beautiful. Even without eyeliner, she looked so bright and adorable. She was so cute. The hosts on the stage couldn't help but applaud fiercely. Below the stage, the audience clapped and regretted it. Why didn't the production team allow them to bring their phones in? Kiki's kitty expression completely destroyed Wu Xin's malicious act of acting cute just now. Many boys and girls couldn't help but express their love for her. However, they still felt very lucky because they saw with their own eyes that there was a kind of cuteness called Kiki. From now on, I'm a fan of little sister Kiki. Chapter 8:20. Thank you, Kiki. Teacher, he clapped and walked up. Behind him, there were 4 other people. Finally, everyone stood on the stage. Poplar Fruit stood on the right side of Teacher, he with Kiki in his arms, which was also the middle position. Sister Na chuckled at the side and said, "Everyone, do you know?" When Teacher he came up, he was about to bend down to shake hands with Kiki. In the end, Poplar Fruit picked up Kiki, and Teacher he could only look up at Kiki like this. Sister Na imitated it vividly, causing everyone to burst into laughter. It wasn't that she made a malicious joke about Teacher his height. These were all small jokes that they used to tease each other. Like Haitao's fat belly, Sister Na's soul dance. Teacher he looked helpless, and Vega asked curiously, "Poplar Fruit, how tall are you?" Haitao was the tallest, but there was still a certain distance between him and Poplar Fruit. In fact, they had talked about these topics offstage. Asking again was to satisfy the audience's curiosity. 187, 188 meters. Poplar Fruit laughed. He was still being modest. He definitely had a height of 188 meters. Moreover, he was close to being 189 meters tall. After the exclamation, "Teacher," he said with a smile, "In our eyes, Poplar Fruit, you are a legend. Do you know that? I secretly calculated yesterday." Fat Haitao held onto the microphone and said with a smile, "Everyone's evaluation of Yang Guo on the internet is that she's a legend, a miracle, and there's even one that left a deep impression on me, and that's an inspirational emperor." Inspirational emperor? Everyone laughed. However, when they thought about it, it did make sense. Yang Guo went from an ordinary student to one of the world's top supermodels in one step. This is all. I didn't pay attention to the inspirational emperor, but a lot of people did say that to me. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "But I don't like this evaluation very much." "Why? Isn't it good to be a legend?" Vega started to act funny again. He smiled and sang, "When I miss you, you're at the horizon, when I miss you, you're right in front of me." Everyone laughed. Back to the topic, Poplar Fruit said with a smile, actually, Brother Waker's song is quite in line with my heart, because I won't be a model anymore, right? So, when you think of me in the future, don't miss me too much. That person is just a temporary legend. Ah! Wait a minute, did I hear wrongly? Poplar Fruit, you're saying that you're not going to be a model anymore? Vega asked in surprise. Actually, they already knew about it yesterday, but for the sake of the show, they had to talk about it again. Yeah. Sister Na frowned and asked with some regret, Poplar Fruit, you are China's #1 male model. Yang Guo waved her hand and said with a smile, it's true. Actually, when I was abroad, I told my foreign media friends that I went to BA Lee to fulfill a promise to a friend. After that, I'll go back to my job. I'm still a student. And I actually have a job. Since Kiki was born, I have been working as a translator. I'm really not belittling the modeling industry. Poplar Fruit bowed and said seriously, in the 1 month in BA Lee, I met a lot of teachers who are enthusiastic about modeling. They are all very admirable. But, really, I can only say that everyone has their own ambitions. Compared to modeling, I prefer to be a translator and I prefer to shine in the teaching industry. The audience applauded, and some were surprised. Most of them were still in shock from Poplar Fruit's sudden revelation. Teacher, he still had to speak up for Poplar Fruit. He stood up and put his arm around Poplar Fruit's shoulder. He smiled at the camera in front of him and said, actually, you may not know, but Poplar Fruit and I have known each other for about half a year. Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded. Teacher, he revealed, at that time, I went back to school to give a lecture. When I came out with Professor Roland, we happened to meet Poplar Fruit, Kiki, and a lady walking around the campus. In the video just now, everyone saw that Professor Roland was very fond of Poplar Fruit's talent. Oh. Vega smiled and asked, Poplar Fruit, is that your girlfriend? Poplar Fruit hurriedly waved his hand and clarified, no, she is just the chief editor of Dongshin Publishing. At that time, I had something to discuss with her in Beijing. Poplar Fruit, I remember that your first translated book, the biography of Steve Jobs, was also published by Dongshin Publishing, right? Wu Xin asked curiously. Were you still talking about this book at that time? No, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. At that time, it was another book, The Pride of Our Chinese People. It was the original work of director Li An's The Fantasy of the Young School, which is about to be released this year. Speaking of which, director Li An also came to Beijing at that time. After some discussion, we decided to release it at the same time as the movie. Please pay more attention to it. This news did not surprise everyone, because the omnipotent reporters had already dug up Li An's support for Poplar Fruit on Twitter. However, everyone was still unclear about the relationship between Poplar Fruit and Li An. Now, they finally understood. The hosts were all considered part of the entertainment industry. After praising director Li An, the topic returned to Poplar Fruit. This was because Poplar Fruit said to everyone, by the way, I saw that the production crew cut out the video of me participating in Unexpectedly. This video was shot when I met teacher he in Beijing. Wow. Fat Haitao asked curiously, Poplar Fruit, how did you get into Unexpectedly? Poplar Fruit shook his head with a smile and said, if I said that filming this short movie was a coincidence, would you believe me? Teacher he and the other hosts shook their heads in unison and said, no. Okay. Poplar Fruit spoke with assurance and said with a smile, that's not true. At that time, the translation company that I was in cooperated with the team called Beast. We invested in the advertising fee, and they came up with the idea to shoot the video. Then, they shot a very wonderful short movie. Of course, I was actually reading the advertisement in it. Wait a minute. Teacher he interrupted him, took the microphone and smiled at Kiki. What did Kiki just say? Kiki also filmed with Papa. Kiki gestured with her 2 small hands above her head and said seriously, Kiki is a cute little Neza. Ah, is that true? Sister Na asked in surprise. Wu Xin interrupted with a smile, I think that a lot of the audience now want to pause the TV to look for Kiki. Poplar Fruit nodded and said with a smile, it's true. She had a sweet mouth at that time. That's why Beast added a scene for her. However, she only appeared for less than 2 seconds, and the editing was done in a flash. Chapter 821. When Mr. He introduced Song Chen, he mentioned that during the New Year's Eve concert 2 years ago, when they connected to Korea, there was a performance by Winnie and her husband. The audience screamed and cheered. It seemed that many of the audience were loyal fans of Winnie and her husband. Even though the show had ended more than a year ago, they still could not forget about them. Mr. He said, "We have been waiting for Song Chen, and Ni Kuan to come. Of course, it will be FX as well, right?" Before Mr. He could finish his sentence, he was drowned out by the screams. Interestingly, even though everyone was screaming, the audience cheered louder and more intensely when Mr. He mentioned Song Chen and Ni Kuan. After Mr. He asked everyone to give Song Chen another round of applause, Wei Ga found Poplar Fruit, who had been standing next to everyone and smiling warmly. He smiled and asked, "Poplar Fruit, before going on the show, did you know that Song Chen would come today?" "I really didn't know," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "But really, I am surprised to see Song Chen." Wu Xin smiled and stood up. Did you notice that even when Poplar Fruit said he was surprised, his expression didn't change much? Yes. Poplar Fruit, are you pretending to be surprised? But in fact, you are thinking, "Hey, such a beautiful girl. Who is she?" Sister Na also joked with Poplar Fruit. No. Poplar Fruit smiled and waved his hand gently. "I am really surprised. Maybe I am good at controlling my expression, so you didn't notice." "I know." Mr. He stood up for Poplar Fruit. "I heard that in the modeling training, there is a training to control one's expression, right?" Poplar Fruit nodded and smiled. "Yes. When we see models on the stage, they are actually expressionless. Sometimes, we feel that the Poplar Fruit standing on the catwalk is different from the Poplar Fruit we see now. At least, he can smile now, but the Poplar Fruit on the catwalk is expressionless." Mr. He laughed. "That's not it." Poplar Fruit smiled. "We also show our emotions, but they can't be shown through facial expressions, because too much of it will steal the show. Emotions are shown through the eyes and the model's aura." "Wow, that's so profound." Wu Xin covered her forehead. Poplar Fruit felt that he had stolen Song Chen's limelight, which made him feel uneasy. He quickly changed the topic. "Song, my girlfriend, and I are also fans of Song Chen." Song Chen looked at Poplar Fruit and asked, "It's my honor." "Yes." Poplar Fruit nodded and smiled. "My girlfriend is a die-hard fan of Winnie and her husband. She likes to watch We Are Married over and over again. She even asks me to watch it with her. Of course, every time she watches it, she cries in the end." Then, on Ni Kuan's birthday, Song Chen cooked a table full of delicious food for him. She was so touched that she wanted to learn how to cook. "She stewed seaweed soup for me for several weeks." Of course, Poplar Fruit was exaggerating. For example, the seaweed soup was made up by him. After watching so many variety shows, he knew a little bit about how to create a joke. Before the hosts could react, the audience below the stage had already burst into cheers and laughter. Song Chen also laughed so hard that she bent over. After she straightened up, she smiled mischievously. "I can confirm that Poplar Fruit is definitely a true fan." Well, the topic finally returned to Song Chen. Teacher He took the opportunity to say, "Actually, when Song Chen came this time, many fans and friends left comments on the internet. They said to each of us, 'Take good care of our Chen girl.'" Teacher He really put down his status and pinched his voice. He pretended to be shy like my daughter when he said the last sentence. It immediately caused another burst of laughter. The presenters and guests on the stage were also laughing. Sister Na was laughing so hard that tears came out of her eyes. In fact, this was just an introduction. Then, Teacher He suggested, "Let's see how Song Chen's attitude is, okay? Because I heard that she is very coquettish, very coquettish." The audience understood instantly. As soon as Teacher He finished speaking, they all screamed. They could actually witness Song Chen acting coquettishly on the spot. This was a benefit that the program team gave to the audience, and even to the audience in front of their television. "Okay, who do you want to start with?" Teacher He turned to Song Chen and asked. "I'll start with Mr. He." Song She held the microphone with both hands and smiled. She wasn't a pushover and was quite a generous girl. Okay, start with me. Teacher. He straightened his back and smiled. Teacher. He. Song Qian's soft voice trailed off as she gave a deep 90-degree bow. Her smile was very sweet. Teacher. He also quickly returned the bow. Song Qian. It's my first time here. Song Shi's voice had obviously become much more delicate and soft. She turned sideways and leaned her right shoulder closer to Mr. He. Then, she squatted slightly and smiled sweetly. So, please take care of me. Then, when the audience below the stage began to cheer uncontrollably like a tsunami, Song Qian tilted her head and made a flirtatious gesture. However, even if it was a flirtatious gesture, she was still very charming. Teacher He, who had always been calm and collected, laughed until his crow's feet appeared. Teacher He did not forget to host. He looked as if he had discovered a new continent. He pointed to his cheek in surprise and said to the audience, "Hey, she can smile like that." Song Qian also laughed until her face turned red. "Okay, no problem." Teacher He said confidently. He was already convinced by Song Qian. "Okay, who's next?" Teacher He asked with a smile. Song Qian was a little embarrassed. She said, then I'll. Teacher He observed her expression and pointed with a smile. It's Brother Weigar's turn. Weigar was the most handsome of the 5 hosts. Although he often looked serious, most of the time, he was unrestrained. He was the best person to cooperate with Song Qian's coquettish behavior. Song Qian understood. She took the opportunity to walk past Teacher He and towards Weigar. Poplar Fruit saw Wu Xin step back and understood. He immediately took a step back and stood next to Wu Xin. This time, it was time to give Weigar and Song Qian a one-on-one shot. Song Qian walked towards Weigar step by step. Her every movement carried the unique tenderness of a woman. Weigar's expression was also very interesting. He had been controlling his expression, but anyone could see that his pursed lips could not hide his smile and excitement. Chapter 822. Oppa. Even though Weijia was still trying his best to control his expression, half of his body went limp after hearing Song Shi's sweet voice. He tried to hold it in, but in the end, he couldn't help but cover his mouth and laugh. He didn't know if it was because he was touched or because he was too emotional, but it looked like he was about to cry. Wu Xin laughed out loud and said, "Are you going to cry?" At that moment, Song Shi leaned on Weijia's shoulder and spoke a long string of Korean softly. She even nudged Weijia with her elbow intimately, and the audience screamed excitedly. Luckily, Weijia still remembered his job. Even though his body was about to go limp, he still managed to hold back his laughter and said, "Are you talking about Mo?" He spoke in the Changju dialect that was often used on Mango TV, but his tone was similar to Song Shi's foreign language. "My Korean is not that good." Vega's wit made everyone laugh. Song Qian was also amused by him, and she bent over with laughter. "Oh, you spoke in Korean?" Teacher He seemed to have discovered a new continent. Sister Na ran over and pulled Poplar Fruit between her and Teacher He. She smiled and said, "Don't forget, there's a language genius among us who knows 13 foreign languages. Let's get Poplar Fruit to translate for us, okay?" Poplar Fruit was also laughing hard. He waved his hand and said, "Let's get Sister Song Shi to translate this. It's too mushy." Poplar Fruit still felt that Song Shi should be given more screen time. He had already said a lot in his introduction, and it was not a big problem whether he was given more screen time. Song Shi was such a beautiful idol, and it was not easy for her to work alone in Korea. Weijia gestured to Song Shi and said with a smile, "One more time, Mandarin, one more time." Thus, Song Shi once again translated what she had just said. "Big brother, this is my first time at the Happy Base Camp. Please take care of me." "Of course," Vega cheekily exclaimed in Changju dialect, eliciting a roar of laughter from the audience. It turned out that Poplar Fruit was right. Although he could have done the translation, that would have only been a reflection of his own abilities. He could not have done the same as Song Qian's translation. Furthermore, with the addition of Vega, the two of them made for an interesting spectacle. Poplar Fruit. Sister Na stared at Poplar Fruit. She looked at Poplar Fruit and asked, "You wouldn't lie to us, right? You don't understand Song Chen's Korean, so you don't want to translate it. Sister Na didn't really want to expose Poplar Fruit's shortcomings. She knew that Poplar Fruit could speak Korean. Why? This was because in the VCR that introduced Poplar Fruit just now, there was a Xiao Duan recording how Poplar Fruit was still talking to the South Korean reporters. She said that just to create a conflicting situation. Then, through everyone's efforts, the situation would be resolved so that everyone would have a deeper impression of Poplar Fruit. Absolutely not. Song Chen was shocked. She thought that she had caused trouble for Poplar Fruit. She quickly raised her hand and said, I can prove that Poplar Fruit really can speak Korean. In fact, he speaks it better than me. Poplar Fruit looked at her with a smile. Hey, Song Chen, could it be that you and Poplar Fruit knew each other before? Fatty Haitao jumped out and questioned, as if he wanted to start a scandal. Once he said that, the audience below the stage cooperated and let out a series of exclamations. No. Song Chen smiled and said, it's like this. When I was in Korea, didn't I pay a visit to the seniors' departure lounge before the popular show? I thought that since it was my first time participating in a domestic variety show, I wanted to pay a visit to the guest who would be on the show with me. So, I went to Poplar Fruit's departure lounge with my manager and assistant. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, yes, when I opened the door, it was so big that Kiki and I were shocked. Vast and mighty? How many people were there? Wu Xin smiled and asked. Actually, there were only 4 including me. I had a makeup assistant and a daily assistant, Song Chen said with a red face. Alright, actually, it was because the departure lounge door was smaller. When I looked out, I thought that there were many people waiting outside, Poplar Fruit said while holding back his laughter. What happened after that? What happened after that? Sister Na asked as if she was listening to a story. She could not help but change the topic. After we greeted each other, one of my assistants said to me. Song Chen said something in Korean and then translated, she meant, Victoria, can you help me get an autograph from Leon Oppa? I'm his fan. Wow. Teacher, he asked in surprise, is Poplar Fruit that famous in Korea? Song Chen nodded and said, yes, before I came back, Poplar Fruit's advertisements were everywhere. Korea is very sensitive to fashion trends. My assistant also paid a lot of attention to Fashion Week. Sometimes, she even helped me pick out clothes. I think that this is not the end, right? Sister Na asked, unwilling to give up. Song Chen smiled and nodded. She said, Poplar Fruit, why don't you simulate your reaction then? To return the favor, Song Chen also fought for more screen time for Poplar Fruit. All right. Poplar Fruit smiled. He was helpless. Poplar Fruit looked at Song Chen and did not know whether to laugh or cry. A string of Korean words came out of his mouth. Many of the audience watched Korean dramas often. Although they did not understand, they could still tell that Poplar Fruit's spoken language was very fluent. It did not feel strange at all when he spoke in Korean dramas. What does that mean? Sister Na asked. It means, sister, do you know me? Poplar Fruit said embarrassedly. Song Chen explained, because my assistant is actually a few years older than Poplar Fruit, but she did not know, so she called Poplar Fruit Oppa just now. Later, when Poplar Fruit called her Nuna, which is sister, she blushed. The main thing is, I heard Sister Song Chen call that assistant Sister Unnie. I felt that if I did not correct it, I would feel awkward. Poplar Fruit smiled embarrassedly. Ha ha. Everyone couldn't help but laugh. Sister Na, who was supported by Fatty Haitao, laughed until her whole body was weak. She said, Poplar Fruit, you are too bad. You clearly understand Korean, but you did not show it. Many of the audience who were slow to react finally reacted. They also laughed with Sister Na. Then, without knowing who took the lead, the audience began to applaud for young Guo. The applause lasted for a few seconds. This was sincere praise. From Song Chen's small revelation, everyone really recognized Poplar Fruit's talent. They were not like before, when they were still confused about Poplar Fruit's achievements abroad. That was too far away from everyone's life. Only a real personal talent could make the audience feel admiration. Chapter 8:23. After that, Teacher He once again invited and welcomed Song Qian and her teammates to participate in a quick dungeon through a video that was shot by the other members of FX. Then, he talked about how Song Qian brought Chinese elements to South Korea and some Xiaoduan pieces. At this point, Sister Na suddenly said, speaking of which, Song Qian's experience is very similar to Poplar Fruit's. Both of them went through a lot of hard work and made a name for themselves overseas. No, Poplar Fruit smiled humbly and said, my experience was only for a short period of time. Sister Song Qian went through 2 years of hard work and many rounds of selection before she could debut in South Korea. I really admire Sister Song Qian for this. No. Song Qian quickly bowed and smiled. Stop praising each other. Teacher He stood in the middle and stopped them speechlessly. You are all the pride of the Chinese people. Song Qian made a name for herself in South Korea, but she let her fans and audience members all over the world see the depth of our Chinese culture. On the other hand, Yang Guo's stunning performance in Bali has spread the strong Chinese style all over the world. So, we are here to give them a round of applause and support again, right? Teacher He smiled and once again stirred up the atmosphere. Song Qian has a very special nickname herself. She is called the mollusk. When Teacher He brought up this topic, he could not help but laugh. Sure enough, Song Qian performed a superb personal skill for everyone. She bent her index finger backwards, and when she touched the back of her hand, it was as if she had been struck by lightning. Yang Guo saw that the hosts were all dumbfounded. Even the audience below the stage let out a burst of screams. You are so unscientific. You look like that. Even Teacher He could not help but complain. Poplar Fruit secretly put his left hand behind his back and tried it. He was shocked to find that he could not do what Song Qian did. Of course, this was also related to Poplar Fruit's lack of practice. If he bent the ligaments of his fingers regularly, he could probably do it too. However, this was enough to prove that Song Qian really lived up to her title as a mollusk. In fact, Poplar Fruit felt that Song Qian's second personal skill, backward bend, might not be better than the first one. If it was just Song Qian's performance, then it wouldn't be that interesting. Next, under Song Qian's suggestion, everyone tried to imitate her third movement, crossing one leg and squatting on one leg. Even Poplar Fruit was full of admiration for Song Qian. Putting aside the difficulty of the movements, the way Song Qian squatted down was very creative. She was like a Buddha who was grinning from ear to ear, although her posture was very strange. Next, under the instigation of Fat Haitao, Sister Na tried it. It was the same high heels. When Sister Na squatted down, her body trembled. Teacher He quickly stepped forward and supported her waist. However, in the end, Sister Na succeeded in squatting down and sat on her right calf. What attracted people's attention wasn't that Sister Na could successfully complete the movement, but that she made it look like a ruffian. Especially when she crossed her legs and looked at the audience with a cold expression and a tuft of hair on her forehead that changed color. It really made people want to laugh. Teacher He hit the nail on the head and commented, "Why do you have the aura of a street wanderer?" The two women did it. The remaining Wu Xin couldn't escape everyone's instigation. Wu Xin crossed her legs, but her body swayed left and right. She couldn't get down no matter what. In the end, Wei Jiao helped support her. Otherwise, Wu Xin would have fallen sideways. Next, Teacher He also tried it. Among the 3 male hosts, his figure was the slimmest. Fat Haitao didn't even have to think about it to know that he couldn't do it. Teacher He still had a slight chance. In the end, in the midst of everyone's shouting, Teacher He finally went down. However, he fell on his butt. I understand. This movement not only requires balance, but also softness. Teacher He sighed and summed up his experience. My balance is fine, but my softness can't keep up. Poplar Fruit should be able to do it, right? Sister Na pulled Poplar Fruit and said, Poplar Fruit, you're a model. Your physical fitness must be very good. I've seen it before. Fat Haitao said enviously, Poplar Fruit has an 8-pack. Come and try it. Teacher He also smiled and persuaded. Okay. Poplar Fruit smiled and handed the microphone to Sister Na. He took 2 steps forward and everyone dispersed from him. Teacher He walked behind Poplar Fruit, worried that he would fall like himself. The eyes of the audience were focused on Poplar Fruit. They saw that he was still smiling gently. His left leg gently drew a circle and lifted it to his right knee. Although he was only standing on one leg, Poplar Fruit's body did not move. It was as if he was rooted. Actually, this movement is easier to do with high heels. Song Qian was worried that Poplar Fruit would make a fool of himself. She wanted to speak up for Poplar Fruit. However, everyone saw that Poplar Fruit slowly bent his right knee and sat down. Amidst this process, the amateurs watched the show, while the experts watched the ropes. Song Qian was surprised to find that even though Yang Guo was sitting down, her body was still balanced like she was on a tripod, and her upper body was straight and upright. Song Qian herself could not keep her upper body straight. She had to hold her left leg and sit down. Her upper body was slightly tilted forward. She had to do this to maintain her balance. The others were even more unbearable. At that time, Sister Na's upper body was bent over her feet. Wow! As his thoughts raced, amidst the cries of surprise from the audience, Yang was steadily squatted down. Furthermore, he squatted down to the very bottom. Yet, he was still as calm as ever, maintaining his warm smile. "It's so easy. Poplar Fruit, you're amazing," Song Qian exclaimed. However, everyone's attention was immediately attracted by Fatty Haitao. He said, Look, Poplar Fruit still has the same expression. Don't you think it's hard?" Poplar Fruit stood up and took the microphone. He smiled and said, "It's okay. In fact, as a model, you have to exercise your body's flexibility. This kind of movement is still within the acceptable range." Poplar Fruit was right. However, he did not mention the fact that he did not exercise his body's flexibility. He did not need to press his legs at all. Poplar Fruit practiced Tai Chi every morning. He could exercise every bone and every muscle in his body. His flexibility had already met the requirements of a model. "Song Qian, you have a challenger." "Teacher," he said to Song Qian with a smile. Chapter 824. Of course, the main format of a quick book was not a conversation, but a game to promote the concept of happiness. The previous introductions took some time. Next, after a simple grouping, the host and guests began the first game. The groups were divided into Poplar Fruit's group and Song Qian's group. Poplar Fruit's group had Sister Na and Haitao, while Song Qian's group had a strong lineup with Teacher He, Vega, and Wu Xin, the three hosts. The first game was to bend down to blow out the candles. Not only did they have to bend down, but they also had to spread their legs. The closer they got to the candles, the better they had to split their legs. One had to know that the path of the legs was like two rays with an angle of nearly 30 degrees in between. Needless to say, this game was better for people with better flexibility. Of course, it wasn't just flexibility. They also had to have good lung capacity and breathing skills. Otherwise, it would be difficult to blow out the long row of candles. Song Qian's group first sent out Wu Xin, who was said to have practiced ballet from the age of 6 to the 4th grade. Looking at Wu Xin's long, straight black hair that fell over her shoulders, Poplar Fruit muttered to Teacher He. Teacher He smiled and said, "Everyone, Poplar Fruit just suggested to me that we pull the candles back. What do you think? Pull back. How much air do you have to breathe to blow out the candles?" Wu Xin looked at Poplar Fruit with some resentment. Poplar Fruit smiled and gestured with his hand. He raised the microphone and explained, "Pull back a little. When you bend down, your hair won't be burned by the candles." Wu Xin was stunned and looked at Poplar Fruit with some gratitude. The host and audience also applauded Poplar Fruit. Although Poplar Fruit rarely started a conversation, he did not drift away from the program and become invisible. He was always involved and gave them a lot of care and help. After she started, Wu Xin's split slowly widened, and she gradually moved her body forward. However, it felt like she was having a hard time. Her pig-like teammate Wei Gar decisively added, Xin, your leg muscles are so obvious." Haha. Everyone focused their eyes. Wasn't that right? Wu Xin's thighs were so tight that her pants had become a little thick cylinder. Wu Xin gritted her teeth and held back her laughter. She trembled stiffly. She was still a little distance away from the furthest end of the two rays, but she could no longer bend down. Wu Xin paused for a moment before she finally summoned up a breath and blew on it. A faint breeze blew past and the candlelight flickered. Another breath, another breath. When Wu Xin blew on it for the third time, she fell to the ground with a plop. When everyone's attention was on the fallen Wu Xin, Mr. He pointed at the candles and laughed. Look, Wu Xin blew them out. She went around 9 candles and blew out the 10th one. All of the hosts stopped laughing. Wu Xin, on the other hand, had a blank look on her face. She stood up with the help of poplar fruit and leaned over to look at the candle. She muttered, "How is this possible? It was too amazing." When it was Team Poplar Fruit's turn, Team Poplar Fruit's Fatty Hightow forfeited before he could even make it halfway. Sister Na was still chasing after him, angry at his incompetence. One must know that there were only 3 people on Yang Guo's side. Next, it was Vega's turn. Vega also didn't put in any effort. He couldn't even reach Wu Xin's position. Fortunately, his breath was longer and he blew out the first 3 candles. Vega's incompetence slightly offset the haze of defeat brought by Fatty Hightow. Poplar Fruit and Sister Na clapped their hands. They seemed to see the hope of turning defeat into victory. Next was Sister Na. However, although Sister Na's flexibility was close to Song Qian's, everyone was still a little worried about her. This was because Sister Na's triangular dress, more like a cloth bag, that Mr. He had ridiculed many times today was a potential factor. Sure enough, as everyone expected, when Sister Na bent down to a certain point, the dress restrained her legs. She couldn't even reach Vega's position. It didn't matter if she couldn't reach him. Fatty Hightow encouraged Sister Na, "Blow them all out in one breath." It was indeed a breath. Yang Guo's eyes were sharp and her hands were quick to support Sister Na. Sister Na did not fall to the ground. However, even so, the candle in front of Sister Na was still burning fiercely, not moving an inch. Poplar Fruit's team sighed. They felt that they were going to lose this round. In the current situation, do you still want to compete? Vega said with a smile. Of course. Sister Na patted Poplar Fruit's arm without fear and said, "We still have Poplar Fruit. Anything is possible." Poplar Fruit made a wry smile. In that case. Then let's continue. This time, Song Qian's team sent their strongest Song Qian instead of Mr. He who was previously discussed. Actually, this was also a requirement of the show. If Mr. He went up, the gap between them would be too big. Poplar Fruit would lose immediately and Song Qian wouldn't have a chance to appear. Song Qian took off her high heels and even stirred up the audience's emotions. As expected of someone who often participated in variety shows in South Korea. She was experienced. She wore thick socks and started to walk up in splits. Poplar Fruit smiled and realized that no matter if one's physique was good or bad, the distance between their legs would get wider and wider as they walked forward. It looked like Donald Duck walking. Song Qian was indeed the strongest. When she reached the top, she bent her waist and lowered her head as much as possible. She blew hard, and blew again, and again. Finally, Song Qian couldn't take it anymore. She placed her hands on the ground and didn't remember to stand up. Instead, she waited for Mr. He to count for her. 1, 2, 3, 10. Song Qian actually blew out 10. 10 plus 3 plus 1. That would be 14. Song Qian blew out 10. That was shocking enough. Could Poplar Fruit blow out more than 14? Everyone's attention was focused on Poplar Fruit. Mr. He, you go up first. Let me know how big the gap is between us and you. Yang Guo said in a solemn and stirring voice. Poplar Fruit, how about this? I won't go up. You do it. As long as you can beat Song Qian and the other 2, you win, okay? Mr. He smiled. Song Qian's team nodded and agreed with Mr. His suggestion. How can that be? Poplar Fruit smiled. It's okay. Mr. He, it's about the same whether I challenge 3 people or 4 people. If I want to win, I have to defeat all of you. All right then. Mr. He lined up in front of Poplar Fruit and walked forward in splits. His splits were wide open, but just like the previous squats, he couldn't keep himself from bending down. In the end, He blew twice and only blew out 6 candles. Then, Poplar Fruit would have to blow out at least 20 candles to remain undefeated. And there were only 20 candles in this row. Chapter 8:25. This time, whether it was the audience or the hosts on the stage, they all felt that Poplar Fruit had no chance of winning. Sister Na also patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and laughed. "It's okay, Poplar Fruit, go ahead. Your goal is not to beat them, but to break your record of not blowing out a single candle." Wei Jiao laughed and bent over. He said the words that Sister Na hadn't finished, but it sounded like he was asking for a beating. "There's no way to add more candles, so let's do it like this. Teacher," he laughed, "let's give Poplar Fruit's team a chance to beat us. As long as Poplar Fruit can blow out all 20 candles and tie with us, then we'll consider them the winner, okay?" In the beginning, when the teams were divided, Teacher he felt that Yang Guo's team, which was already very strong, had Sister Na, who often exploded with super strength, and Fatty Haitao, who was often a weakness like Wu Xin, could still compete with Song Qian's team. Therefore, he let Yang Guo's team fight against 4. However, what everyone didn't expect was that not only did Fatty Haitao become a black hole, but Sister Na also tricked her teammate. Since Yang Guo was going to fight, Le Zai's participation was more meaningful. Seeing Poplar Fruit walk to the starting point with a shy smile, Song Qian asked worriedly, "Will Poplar Fruit's suit pants be risky? Are you talking about the open crotch?" Vega asked while holding back his laughter. "It's okay." Poplar Fruit smiled and comforted them. "The quality of this brand's clothes is still good." He also pointed to the Givenchy logo. Although he didn't say it directly, he still secretly made a soft advertisement for the clothes he was endorsing. It could be said that he was loyal to the king after all. Poplar Fruit's face was full of smiles. Then, like the others, he walked forward like a duck. The more he walked, the more his long legs showed their advantage. At the end, he didn't even need to press down on his ligament. "Can I continue to walk forward?" Poplar Fruit asked Teacher He for a microphone and smiled. "Look, my hair isn't long. I can still walk forward." "Yes, yes." The audience below the stage answered for Teacher He and the others. Teacher He also smiled and nodded. He suddenly had some expectations in his heart. He wanted to see if a miracle would happen. Poplar Fruit slowly moved forward again, almost touching the first candle. It was too thrilling. Poplar Fruit finally stopped in front of everyone's exclamations. Poplar Fruit suddenly turned to the camera and said, Poplar Fruit, please don't imitate my next move. I've practiced." Everyone was amused by him, but they still didn't quite understand what Yang Guo meant. At that moment, Poplar, his lower body was stable, and his upper body was like an upside-down waterspout. His head slowly dived down. To think that one breath could last so long. Everyone saw that the first candle in front of Poplar Fruit flickered and was blown out. A wisp of smoke rose in spirals. The second candle was also extinguished, then the third, the fourth. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Mister," he exclaimed. Song Qian and the others covered their mouths and widened their eyes. The Poplar Fruit's head was getting lower and lower, and the distance between him and the candle was getting closer and closer. However, he still hadn't finished his breath. Almost one after another, Poplar Fruit blew out all the candles under his body. Amidst the exclamations of the audience and Sister Na's quick count, Zhongyi had already blown out 13 candles in the Poplar Fruit. At this time, his body couldn't be any lower. If it went any lower, it would touch the burning wax. The extinguishing of the candles was still ongoing. Poplar Fruit could no longer get close to the other candles. He was still relying on his first breath to blow out the candles behind him. 15, 16, 17. The audience cheered in unison with Sister Na, who seemed to be winning. At that moment, it was as if everyone had become a member of Poplar Fruit's team. Song Qian's team's palms were sweating as they looked at Poplar Fruit, who was still blowing out the candles. Actually, blowing out all the candles wasn't a problem. Poplar Fruit knew that with this breath, even if there were 10 more candles behind him, he would still be able to blow them out. However, did he really have to blow them out completely? For outdoor reality shows like Running Man, games and competition were the most important things to watch. However, it was a different story. Winning wasn't important. What was important was the drama and the topic of the show. This was what attracted the audience to continue watching. Poplar Fruit didn't plan to win this round. He didn't think about it from the start. When he squatted down and started blowing out the candles, he already had a plan. 17, 18, 19. Poplar Fruit's body swayed. It seemed like he was running out of breath. Wu Xin said worriedly, "Poplar Fruit, you can take another breath and blow again. As long as your hands aren't on the ground, you can keep blowing." Of course, as soon as Wu Xin said that, she was treated as a traitor by her teammates. Teacher He and Wei Jiao looked dejected as if they had seen the door to failure. Poplar Fruit's eyes lit up as if he had been enlightened. He stopped blowing, smiled brightly, and took a deep breath. Cough cough, cough cough. He suddenly coughed. The cough seemed to have affected his balance. He swayed up and down, and finally, he couldn't stabilize himself and fell to the ground. He couldn't move forward. Everyone was dumbfounded. The scene was silent. This script didn't seem right. Wasn't it supposed to be Poplar Fruit blowing out 20 candles and then turning the tables? The hosts were also dumbfounded. Of course, Song Qian's team was pleasantly surprised. Only Teacher He looked at Poplar Fruit strangely. Poplar Fruit sat on the ground, as if he couldn't believe what had happened. However, the last candle was still burning steadily. This. Sister Xin, you tricked me, Poplar Fruit said with grief and indignation. If I had blown it again, the last candle might have gone out. Then, I could have taken a breath. It's all smoke, it's suffocating. Ha ha, ha ha. Everyone was a little disappointed at first. But when they thought about how Poplar Fruit didn't make a big comeback because of this, they were overjoyed. Wu Xin, on the other hand, was surrounded by her teammates. The black hole and the traitor from before had now become the key to their victory. Poplar Fruit stood up with the help of Sister Na and Fatty Haitao. He restrained the smile on his face and pointed at Song Qian's team with sadness, loneliness, and unwillingness. We will be back." This sentence was the most classic sentence of the bad guys in animation and movies. Once again, it caused the audience to burst into laughter. This sentence also announced the end of the description of the program. I'm ashamed. Xiao Han also felt that he was good at writing. He just wanted to write the plot well. He didn't expect to write so many chapters and still not finish. This plot will be continued after a while. Chapter 826. The day passed quickly. After finishing the movie, Poplar Fruit, Mr. He, and the other 4 hosts became good friends. They exchanged contact information and followed each other's Weibo accounts. Originally, Mr. He wanted to keep Yang Guo around for a few more days. After all, if he considered Professor Luo Lin's relationship, he and Yang Guo could be considered old friend. Poplar Fruit wasn't a superstar, but he didn't have a lot of free time. The weekend was coming, and he had promised Feng Beibei that he would go to the stray dog rescue center with her. He politely declined, then took a nap in the hotel. The next morning, he flew back to Yang City with Kiki. Yarrow Dehua had complained to Poplar Fruit many times, saying that he hadn't come back to the company for so long. Now, the Xinda Translation Academy had been set up, and 2 batches of translators had been trained. Many students from other languages were asking why Poplar Fruit hadn't taught them. Poplar Fruit decided to give the selected translators 7 days in a row this week. Yang Guo had high hopes for this batch of translators. This was because Yarrow Dehua had told him that there would be 2 classes. One of the classes would be made up of tens of thousands of English silver medal translators from all over the country. There would also be 50 translators who were carefully selected. These 50 translators, who were all under 32 years old, would become the first core force of Zheng Yujie's new Translation Road publishing house. At the moment, the publishing house had just started. Even though they were releasing translations of Mr. Mo Yang's works, they were only able to do so with the help of Amazon. New Translation Road publishing house's marketing staff alone couldn't support the marketing of so many different languages. Therefore, instead of spreading his fingers, he clenched his fists and punched. In the early days of the publishing house, They could only work hard to enter the English book market, which was the largest book market in the world. When the publishing house grew stronger, they would slowly expand into the market of different languages, and target the market with precise positioning. Of course, that would be many years in the future. Right now, it would take more than half a year for the publishing house to digest all the books that Yang Guo had translated. Then, this batch of silver medal translators who had no experience in literature translation would also take a very long time to develop, even though they had a foundation in translation. The road ahead still had to be taken one step at a time. In addition to the group of translators who would join the publishing house in the future, there were also gold medal translators recommended by various provinces and cities. Yang Guo would also tell them about her experience in translating small languages and give them some targeted guidance for different languages. Speaking of which, before Poplar Fruit left for the shooting, he told Chen Zhongdai about this. At that time, Chen Zhongdai didn't object to Poplar Fruit's betrayal. Instead, he strongly supported Poplar Fruit's teaching. At first, Poplar Fruit was confused, because he knew how much his teacher wanted him to focus on his studies. However, later on, Poplar Fruit thought about it and understood the mystery. The old man was indeed astute. Poplar Fruit didn't have much teaching experience. Even though he trusted Poplar Fruit so much, he only allowed Poplar Fruit to start teaching next semester. This semester, he only wanted Poplar Fruit to focus on his studies and ask for more advice from the other professors in the school. Now that there was such a good opportunity for Poplar Fruit to practice, and the school didn't have to bear any risks, Chen Zhongdai would probably wake up laughing in his dreams. Not only that, but the old man also gave Poplar Fruit a task. Every day in class, he had to prepare and summarize his lessons. Finally, he had to write a summary report as a practical assignment for the old man to mark. Poplar Fruit had one advantage as a student, and that was that he was willing to work hard without complaint. The old man gave him a lot of freedom. Whatever the old man gave him, he would complete it seriously and exceed his expectations. There was no need for the old man to worry about him. This was a good habit that he had cultivated since he was young. When he was young, he was the most hard-working student in the countryside. When he entered university, he also worked hard. It was just that his foundation wasn't good enough, and his grades were always below average. This was the difference between him and Song Jiwen. Song Jiwen's foundation was very good, and he was also very smart. It was just that he didn't want to spend time on his studies. His main focus was picking up girls, so the two's grades were almost the same. For a time, they became brothers in distress. The plane soon landed in Yangcheng. It was noon when the sun was at its strongest. Poplar Fruit carried Kiki and dragged a small suitcase out. He immediately saw Fong Beibei standing in the crowd. "Uncle, Kiki." Fong Beibei also saw Poplar Fruit and happily greeted him. "Sister Beibei," Kiki sweetly called out. She reached out her hands. "Hug. Didn't I tell you not to pick me up at the airport?" Poplar Fruit tenderly stroked Fong Beibei's cold cheeks. He used the warmth of his palm to warm her up. "Look at how sweaty you are. The hair around your neck is still wet. You're going to catch a cold from the air conditioning. It's okay. I'll walk and stand for a while. I'll take it as exercise to lose weight." Fong Beibei smiled as she carried Kiki over. Fong Beibei didn't take a taxi. She felt that it was too expensive, so she squeezed into the bus. "Wait a minute." Poplar Fruit took out the tissues that he always prepared for Kiki. He helped Fong Beibei wipe the sweat on her neck. Then, he put his arm around Fong Beibei's shoulder and the two of them walked out of the airport. "Kiki, is it fun to record a show with Daddy?" Fong Beibei smiled. In the phone call last night, Poplar Fruit told her that Kiki was also on TV. Kiki hugged Fong Beibei's neck and giggled. "It's fun. Kiki was so beautiful yesterday. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. She could do magic." Everyone told her that it was a real magic wand. They even gave it to Kiki to bring home. Fong Beibei raised her head and looked at Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Let's leave some suspense. You'll know when you watch TV in the future." After getting into the taxi, Fong Beibei muttered to Poplar Fruit, "I saw online this morning that Song Qian was also here. Did you get an autograph for me? Of course. Poplar Fruit smiled and pinched Fong Beibei's nose. Do you think I don't know what you like, baby? Don't pinch me like I'm Kiki. Fong Beibei raised her nose and pretended to bite down. Poplar Fruit was so scared that he quickly retracted his hand and threatened. Poplar Fruit wasn't scared by Fong Beibei. The two of them were just playing around. Poplar Fruit saw that Kiki was very focused on the scenery outside the car window. The driver didn't notice them either. He secretly stretched his head and whispered in Fong Beibei's ear, "Baby." Fong Beibei subconsciously turned her head. Poplar Fruit saw it clearly. He lowered his head and gently kissed Fong Beibei's soft lips. Of course, outside, Poplar Fruit also took Fong Beibei's face into consideration. After his sneak attack succeeded, he immediately let go. Fong Beibei came to her senses. She quickly glanced at the driver in front of her. From this angle, the driver shouldn't be able to see it. She then rebuked Poplar Fruit and glared at him. Poplar Fruit gently smiled and opened his left shoulder. Fong Beibei bit her lower lip with her pearly white teeth. Her face was red, but she still leaned over and leaned into Poplar Fruit's embrace. Poplar Fruit hugged Fong Beibei's shoulder and let her rest her head on his chest. Fong Beibei's soft hair exuded the fragrance of green apples. It was light and very pleasant. Chapter 8:27. The autumn rain in Jiangnan was lingering like the low hum of an erhu. The strings tugged at people's hearts. Although the sky after the rain was clear, it also became cold and desolate. The blue light made people panic. In the tea house, the fragrance of tea lingered in the air, but it was still as quiet as before. However, only that lonely and cold figure was left in the banquet. She made tea and washed the tea leaves herself. She was very familiar with all her actions, but she was not as skilled as before. Perhaps, that was the mistake of relying on and getting used to another person's existence. Pi Nh1 had disappeared. He had really disappeared. Not only did she miss the appointment for 1 or 2 days, but his phone was turned off. Duan Xueqing also went to his wedding photography shop. The door was closed, and there was a big red notice on the door saying that the shop was for sale. He had really disappeared without a trace. He had disappeared without a trace, as if he had never appeared. But why did the memories still feel so real? Duan Xueqing was expressionless, but the cold aura on her body deepened. She didn't seem to care at all. That man had come and gone without leaving a trace in her life and heart. It was not that there were no changes. These days, Duan Xueqing was sometimes engrossed in reading. When she picked up the teacup again and took a sip, her mouth was cold. The tea was cold. No one had made it new, so naturally, she drank cold water. The bitter taste could not find the sweetness that tea should have. Often, at this time, she would be stunned and motionless. She would stay like this for a long time, as if she had turned into wood. She waited for his dazed eyes to focus again before she silently boiled the water to make tea again. Before evening, the fiery sunset urged people to go home. Duan Xueqing also packed up briefly, carried her school bag, and pushed the cart away. She didn't want to ride a bicycle, but when she was waiting for the traffic light at the intersection, the bleak autumn wind blew on the street with few cars. The autumn wind was slightly cold. Duan Xueqing hugged her school bag tightly in front of her. When she was alone, she had to warm herself. When she got home, the gatekeeper stuck his head out and said with a smile, "Miss, you have a package. Our Lai has sent it to your room." Our Lai was the Duan family's nanny. The Duan family usually called her Ma Lai. "Thank you." Duan Xueqing nodded politely. Her coldness was only on her face. She still understood the necessary etiquette and greetings between people. Back in her room, Duan Xueqing was not in a hurry to deal with the package. She took out the 3 books that she had brought with her and placed them on the table. Then, she hung her school bag on the coat rack. Duan Xueqing's room was more like an apartment with a bedroom and a living room. The bedroom was more than 30 square meters. The living room was her study, which was a bit like Poplar Fruit's study. There were many books on the bookshelves. However, Duan Xueqing's books were mostly romance novels, while Poplar Fruit's books were more practical. Her room had a separate bathroom and balcony. In total, it was more than 70 square meters. Needless to say, the entire manor of the Dewan family was even bigger. One had to know that the Dewan family's garage had 5 sports cars. The Dewan family was indeed one of the wealthiest families in the area. This was also why Mother Dewan had cried when she went to Yangcheng and saw her daughter living in a dark and damp tube-shaped apartment. Fortunately, Dewan Xueqing came back after less than a year. Mother Dewan happily took her grandchildren and her husband, who was about to retire, to travel the world. They had been traveling for more than 2 months, but there was no sign of them coming back. Who sent the package? Dewan Xueqing stood in front of the desk and looked puzzledly at the package that was sloppily written in the signature area. The package wasn't big, and it was about the size of 2 books. However, when she touched the package, Dewan Xueqing's heartstrings suddenly trembled. In her mind, Pi Nh1's bright smile appeared. She retracted her long and slender hand, as if she had touched something hot that she couldn't pick up. This was an illness. It had to be treated. Dewan Xueqing was expressionless, but in her heart, she was laughing at herself. It seemed that she had read too many romance novels. Although she had read them when she was in university, she had been reading foreign classics recently. However, how could she always think about the same thing in the direction of emotions when she saw it? It couldn't be something that Pi Nh1 sent as a farewell gift. They hadn't become boyfriend and girlfriend yet, and they hadn't given each other anything. What could Pi Nh1 have sent? Smelly socks. Instead, she put her hand on the package with a paper cutter. With a light cut, the package opened. Dewan Xueqing saw an envelope wrapped in craft paper. With doubts, Dewan Xueqing opened the envelope and took out a stack of photos. There was also a very old cassette tape that was basically unheard of nowadays. The photos were placed upside down. Dewan Xueqing turned them over. The first photo made her pupils shrink slightly. Dewan Xueqing was very familiar with the person in the photo. It was the person who had disappeared, but Dewan Xueqing still couldn't believe that Pi Nh1 had disappeared. From the angle of the photo, Dewan Xueqing could see his clothes and the name of the hotel that he was about to enter. She couldn't understand the name of the hotel in French, but it didn't matter. Dewan Xueqing could recognize the clothes that Pi Nh1 was wearing. Dewan Xueqing was very sure that this photo was taken not too long ago. Dewan Xueqing took a deep breath. She felt that her hands were trembling. She felt that she was about to uncover a very, very well-packaged secret. However, she really didn't want to see it or know it. She stumbled back and sat down on the chair. Dewan Xueqing looked at the stack of photos in her hand. Her gaze was fixed on Pi Nh1's face in the first photo. The background was slightly dark. The man that she thought she was very familiar with didn't seem to have the bright smile on his face. For a long time, she didn't dare to uncover it. Half an hour later, Dewan Xueqing was still stuck on the first photo. It wasn't until Aunt Lai came over to call her for dinner that Dewan Xueqing hurriedly stuffed the photos and the cassette into her bag. She threw the bag under the table and even kicked it. If Poplar Fruit was watching from the side, he would definitely be very, very surprised. This was because ever since he met Dewan Xueqing for 5 years, Poplar Fruit had never seen Dewan Xueqing so flustered. Even her beautiful face, which was as calm as an ancient well, was filled with panic. Of course, this only lasted for a short few seconds. Dewan Xueqing regained her cold expression. The only person at home who accompanied her for dinner was her second sister-in-law. Her brothers and sisters-in-law were all working outside and buying houses. They rarely came back for dinner. Her second sister-in-law was pregnant, so she came back to the quiet old house to rest. Her second sister-in-law knew Dewan Xueqing's temperament. After greeting her, she didn't say much and ate with her. However, no one noticed Dewan Xueqing's abnormality. Although she was still cold, she seemed to have lost her soul today. She only ate the food in front of her. After slowly finishing a bowl of rice, she didn't know why, but she returned to her room in a daze. Xiao Han admits that it's a little torturous. However, everyone must believe that Xiao Han's novel is beautiful. After the storm, it's definitely a beautiful rainbow. Chapter 828. In a trance, Duan Xueqing found that she was back in her room, and the stack of photos that she didn't dare to open was in her hands again. In fact, she had only seen one photo, but the uneasiness in her heart made her not dare to look at it again. She didn't dare to touch the truth that might make her fall to the bottom. However, she had to look at it anyway, right? The more uneasy she was, the more she wanted to see it, and the more she wanted to prove that her premonition was wrong. When she touched the first photo, Duan Xueqing's hands suddenly stopped trembling, and her eyes showed a trace of determination. Whether it was good or bad, she had to face it. In the second photo, Duan Xueqing saw that Pi Nh1 had changed his clothes and was holding a cup of coffee in a street park. He was chatting with a middle-aged foreign man. Frowning, Duan Xueqing remembered that when Pi Nh1 was in Ba Li, he almost always stayed in the hotel, just like her, and almost never went out if there was no activity. Not to mention that he was chatting happily with a foreigner. This scene made her feel a little unbelievable. However, this photo was very natural, and it didn't look like it was Photoshop. Looking at the next photo, it was still the same foreigner, but Duan Xueqing noticed that it was different from the previous photo. The pixel of the photo was very clear, and she could see that Pi Nh1 was handing over the USB flash drive. In the next photo, the foreigner was holding a mobile phone and checking the contents of the USB flash drive. In the next photo, Duan Xueqing saw a scene that she didn't want to see. The foreigner handed a few bills to Pi Nh1. Suddenly, Duan Xueqing felt that her inner world was shattering. Why did the Pi Nh1 in the photo with the black-rimmed glasses look so strange? Duan Xueqing didn't believe that Pi Nh1 came all the way to a foreign country just to be a water customer and sell domestic USB flash drives. What was in the USB flash drive? Could it be a state secret? Duan Xueqing didn't even dare to think about it. However, even though her heart was in turmoil, Duan Xueqing's expression became more and more calm. Her hands were very steady, and her eyes were no longer confused. She wanted to know an answer, and this answer could only surface if she continued to watch. However, Duan Xueqing couldn't find any clues in the following photos, because they were almost the same as the previous photos. Pi Nh1 was constantly in contact with different foreigners, and he kept selling the USB flash drives in his hands. Duan Xueqing opened the photos one by one numbly. When she reached the last photo, Duan Xueqing's hand stopped moving. The last photo was of Pi Nh1 standing at a crossroad and looking into the distance. This was not a picture of a hipster. What about looking up at the sky at a 45-degree angle? It was all nonsense. Duan Xueqing could clearly see that in the direction Pi Nh1 was looking, there was a building with a logo that she was very familiar with. Wasn't that Givenchy's clubhouse? Duan Xueqing thought of another man's name, Poplar Fruit. What kind of connection did they have? Suddenly, Duan Xueqing thought of Pi Nh1's abnormal mood when he faced Poplar Fruit on the main stage. She thought of the next day when Pi Nh1 came back from the cocktail party with a bloody nose and a swollen face. She thought of the strange suggestion that Pi Nh1 suddenly wanted to return to China. Duan Xueqing felt her mind was in a mess. What was wrong with the world? Why did the people she knew become so strange? Originally, they were all ordinary people. But now, Yang Guo was famous all over the world. The world was paying attention to him. As for Bai Tingyuan, the man who accompanied her in a quiet tea house to pass time, he was also doing some strange business with foreigners. Yes, business. Duan Xueqing had already determined this matter in her heart. After flipping through the last photo, there were no more photos. Duan Xueqing did not look for the photos she had seen before. She clearly remembered that the back of each photo was blank. There was no third item in the package, not even a letter explaining what it was. At first glance, these photos were like clues to a mystery. She racked her brain to think and guess. Whether it was sent by Pi Nh1 or not, Duan Xueqing did not care. She only wanted to know what message this package was trying to convey. Duan Xueqing suddenly remembered that there was a cassette in the package. The person who sent the package was too careful. The photos and cassette were all sent in the most ancient way. Originally, an email could have solved the problem completely. The other party had eliminated the possibility of the technology, but Who would listen to cassette tapes in this day and age? Standing up, Duan Xueqing rummaged through her cupboard for a long time before she found the recorder that she had kept as a childhood toy. Then, she removed the battery of the air conditioner remote control and put it in. Hearing the sound of the recorder turning on, Duan Xueqing's tightly pursed lips relaxed a little. Putting the cassette tape in and closing the lid, Duan Xueqing thought for a while. Then, she plugged in her earphones and pressed the play button. At the beginning, the knocking sound was dull, as if it was echoing in a claustrophobic space. Duan Xueqing listened expressionlessly. After knocking for a while, she heard the sound of the door opening. "Why did you only open now? Why did you only come now?" Duan Xueqing did not respond to the first voice. Hearing this rhetorical question, Duan Xueqing's pupils contracted slightly. She recognized Pi NH1's voice. The first voice gave a brief explanation. Pi NH1 said again, "Okay, what do you want me to do? You know, I'm not a special agent. I'm afraid that I might mess up some of your operations. Was there something else going on here?" Duan Xueqing had a lot of doubts in her mind. "This is your mission." Duan Xueqing heard the sound of paper bags rattling. With doubts in her heart, Duan Xueqing suddenly heard a sentence that made her heart flutter. Pi NH1 said it. What does that mean? Isn't it to deal with poplar fruit? Deal with poplar fruit. Duan Xueqing suddenly felt that many messy thoughts were connected in an instant. With the static in the recorder, the scene was almost replayed in Duan Xueqing's ears. The more Duan Xueqing listened, the more her heart sank. The recording was actually incomplete. The stranger told Pi NH1, "Once you finish this, you can go back to the hotel. Hurry up, you only have tomorrow." As soon as the voice fell, a click sound was heard, and the recording stopped abruptly. From the noise just now, she suddenly returned to the dead silence of reality. Duan Xueqing only felt that her heart was very cold. Her whole body, from the inside out, seemed to be frozen in the ice of a 10,000-year-old glacier. As if she wanted to struggle again, Duan Xueqing turned on her computer and looked up the news of poplar fruit in Ba Li. This was nothing new in the country. Many domestic media had introduced him to the criticism and humiliation he received from Ba Li's media before he became famous. The last clue was also connected. Everything had an answer. So, was it all an act? The fake sunny smile, the fake quiet and considerate, and the fake companionship of Shishi? It was all fake. The photo studio was fake. The wedding photographer was fake. Even though he didn't say it, his actions showed that he liked her were all fake. But why was the truth so heavy? It was so heavy that Duan Xueqing felt that she couldn't bear it anymore. With a pa sound, the mouse slipped to the ground. At the same time, a string of her heart that couldn't bear the heavy burden broke. Begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 829. 2 days ago, poplar fruit was still standing on the stage of a fast casual game. Today, even if the fans stood in front of poplar fruit, they probably wouldn't be able to recognize that this rural guy was the handsome poplar fruit. Looking at poplar fruit's current outfit, he was wearing an old-fashioned white shirt with a few buttons undone and the sleeves rolled up. Paired with black knee-length sweatpants, he looked a little out of place. His long dark green water boots made squeaking sounds as he stepped on the ground. He also had a towel wrapped around his neck, like an educated youth from the 70s and 80s. He also had a big woven straw hat that covered most of his handsome face. No matter how you looked at it, this rustic young man was waving a big broom, sweeping the dog feces, cat feces, and mixed hair on the ground into a piece. Although his work was not eye-catching, his movements were natural. Every sweep seemed to contain the truth of heaven and earth. Well, in fact, Yang Guo was only using Taiji fist to sweep the floor. The efficiency did not seem to be much higher, but it saved a lot of effort. Furthermore, it was able to sweep all the rubbish in a radius of a few meters into a small circle. Today, poplar fruit accompanied Feng Beibei to volunteer at the Stray Dog Rescue Center. Feng Beibei had been busy preparing for the competition and hadn't come for 3 months. Although he was accompanying her, poplar fruit still worked very hard. Because it was the weekend, There were other volunteer teams coming to help. Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei were in charge of the cat and dog house on the east side. These were already tamed stray cats and dogs, waiting for kind-hearted people to come and adopt them. The door was pushed open, and Fang Beibei, who was also dressed like a peasant woman, staggered in with a bucket of water in her hand. Chichi, on the other hand, was holding her little magic wand and happily following behind her. Behind them, a big golden dog ran in. It was the grown-up Goldie. It looked around curiously. The smell around made Goldie feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity. However, it was too young when it left, so how could it still remember? Poplar Fruit held the broom upside down and ran to Fong Beibei's side. He took the bucket with his left hand and smiled. "I'll do it. The ground has been swept clean. All that's left is to pile up the garbage and put it in the trash can next to it. Let's exchange." Fong Beibei gasped and wiped the sweat on her face with the clothes on her arm. Poplar Fruit stopped her. Poplar Fruit's right hand let go of the broom. He untied the white towel wrapped around his neck and helped Fong Beibei wipe her sweat with the towel. With a red face, Fong Beibei raised her head and let Poplar Fruit gently caress her face through the towel. She and Poplar Fruit looked at each other and welcomed the deep affection in Poplar Fruit's eyes. "Okay." Poplar Fruit stopped and wrapped the towel back around his neck. He smiled and said, "I'm going to work." Fong Beibei didn't listen. She stepped forward and hugged Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit patted Fong Beibei's back and said with a smile, "You're dirty. Let's work first. We'll hug when we get back." Fong Beibei's cheeks were red from Poplar Fruit's witty words. She patted Poplar Fruit's chest. Then she squatted down and picked up the broom. Kiki also ran over and wanted to hug her papa. Her hand reached her father's water boots. Poplar Fruit quickly stopped Kiki and said with a smile, "No, no, Papa is working. Then Sister Beibei is fine too." Kiki put her hands on her waist and said unwillingly, "Sister Beibei is not fine either." Poplar Fruit said with a straight face, "Papa is going to criticize her." Kiki hesitated and looked at Sister Beibei. The little girl was still very kind. She said to her father, "Okay, Kiki doesn't want to hug. Papa, don't criticize Sister Beibei, okay?" The logic was wrong, but the intention was good. Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded to the little girl. The water that was brought back was used to wash the cat and dog house. Poplar Fruit carried the bucket to a clean corner. Half a bucket of water was flushed down, and the water on the floor immediately spread. The sound of the water flushing caused the cats and dogs to feel uneasy, and they began to become a little restless. But fortunately, after a while, they found that the environment they were in was actually safe and sound, and they lazily lay back down. The animals in the rescue station were actually very pitiful. There were not enough people, and it was impossible to let them out of the cage. It was good enough that they could be let out for a few hours a week. Most of the cats and dogs looked very dispirited because they stayed in the cage for a long time. Not to mention animals, even people who were locked in a cage would look pale and have dull eyes. Poplar Fruit had been in prison before, and he understood this feeling. However, he did not have any good solutions. He could only hope that they could all find a good home to be adopted. Now Poplar Fruit was also helping. After he flushed the water, he picked up another big broom and swept the water away, washing away the dust and traces of feces on the ground. After sweeping once, Poplar Fruit picked up the remaining half bucket of water and washed it away. After the water flowed, only the clean floor was left, and the stains were washed away by the water into the drain. A bucket of water was only enough for Poplar Fruit to wash a small area. Poplar Fruit estimated that it would take at least 20 buckets of water to wash the entire cat and doghouse clean. Fong Beibei was still putting the garbage into the trash can next to her. Poplar Fruit greeted her and took the bucket outside to get water. When he came back, Fong Beibei was surprised to see that Poplar Fruit had a pole on each of his shoulders. He carried 4 buckets of water in one go. "Uncle, are you crazy? It's so heavy." Fong Beibei hurried over, wanting to help. No, I can do it myself." Poplar Fruit was not panting, and smiled with ease. He squatted down steadily and put the 4 buckets of water on the ground. It was just 4 buckets of water. How could Yangwa find it strenuous? Does it hurt? Fong Beibei pressed Poplar Fruit's shoulders to prevent him from standing up. She gently rubbed Poplar Fruit's shoulders, worried that the pole would hurt Poplar Fruit's shoulders. It doesn't hurt, but your massage is very comfortable. Poplar Fruit was in a horse stance, with his back to Fong Beibei, and smiled. After a while, Poplar Fruit began to wash again. At this time, Kiki suddenly ran in. Wasn't she very enthusiastic to help Sister Beibei just now? Although she was just helping to push the trash can with rollers, and Fong Beibei was there, Kiki didn't know if Poplar Fruit used any strength, but her intention to help was good. Kiki happily stepped on the watermarks that Poplar Fruit had washed with gold. Some of the water splashed up, and the squeaking sound made the little guy feel very happy. Kiki! Poplar Fruit shouted. He could see that Kiki's red running shoes were stained with black spots because of the mud splashed up by stepping on it. Chapter 8:30. Kiki. You. Before Poplar Fruit could finish his sentence, Kiki suddenly stepped into a small puddle and almost fell. However, although she had a good sense of balance and did not fall, the water she stepped on splashed Gold, who was following behind her. Black water droplets stuck to Gold's beautiful golden fur like raindrops, and his face was suddenly covered in water. Goldie subconsciously shook his head, and the water droplets sprayed all over Chichi's body again like 1,000 flowers. Ha ha. Kiki covered her face with her hands and laughed loudly. Her bell-like laughter echoed in the cat and dog house. Poplar Fruit was so focused on Kiki that he did not notice that, in the laughter of Kiki, the depressed cats and dogs in the cat and dog house stood up. Their dull eyes became lively again, and they looked at Kiki with longing for freedom. Kiki, be careful, don't fall. Poplar Fruit had already said half of his scolding, but when he spoke again, it became a gentle reminder. Poplar Fruit saw Kiki and Gold playing in the water, and a lot of mud splashed on each other. Poplar Fruit was very angry, but this kind of happiness and childlike behavior reminded Poplar Fruit of his childhood. At that time, in the countryside, childhood was free, and there was no need to attend all kinds of extracurricular classes. He could climb trees with his friends, dig out bird nests, play with ant holes, and run to the stream to catch fish. These were all experiences that Kiki, who was born in a big city, did not have. Therefore, Poplar Fruit suddenly felt that Kiki should have her free childhood. If he restricted her too much, Kiki would lose her little happiness. Kiki, don't step on the places where Daddy hasn't washed yet. Daddy can only come back after he finishes washing twice, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Although he allowed Kiki to play, he could not let his daughter roll in the smelly muddy water, right? Haha, Daddy also wants to play. Kiki grabbed Gold, pressed her body on Gold's back, and waved to her father with a smile. No. Daddy has to work, you see, there are so many places where Daddy hasn't washed yet. Poplar Fruit waved the big broom and said, stay away from Daddy, don't get hit by this broom, it hurts. Poplar Fruit. Suddenly, a coquettish voice came from the door. Fong Beibei came back with a trash can and stood at the door, stomping her feet. What's wrong? Poplar Fruit looked at Fong Beibei in confusion, only to see Fong Beibei put down the trash can, anxiously ran over, picked up Kiki, and then walked to him. Our daughter is playing in the water, her clothes are wet, didn't you see? Fong Beibei came over, pulled the towel from Poplar Fruit's neck, and said angrily. How could he not see? Compared to before, Kiki became a big tabby cat, and then Gold became a spotted dog. Fong Beibei took Poplar Fruit's towel and wiped the water and dirt on Kiki's face. Kiki giggled, dodged here and there, and refused to wipe her face. Poplar Fruit was reprimanded by Fong Beibei. She scratched her head and said, let her play, it's okay, right? Fong Beibei said angrily, of course it's okay if you're an uncouth man. Kiki is so small, her clothes are wet, you see, it's the change of seasons recently, Kiki's immune system is low, it's easy for her to catch a cold. Kiki swung her ponytail and said in fear, Kiki, don't catch a cold, my nose hurts. Then why are you playing in the water? Fong Beibei pinched Kiki's little face through the towel and smiled, your father is not sensible, let's not argue with him. Let's go, Sister Beibei will take you to change your clothes. She took the car key from Poplar Fruit, who looked ashamed, and took Kiki to find clothes to change. Behind them was a dirty golden retriever, its paws still splashing water. "I'm so stupid." Poplar Fruit knocked on his head, a little annoyed. He only cared about making Kiki happy, but he was not as considerate as Fong Beibei. Poplar Fruit shook his head and was very dissatisfied with himself. He waved the broom and decided to work hard to make up for his mistakes. Poplar Fruit cleaned the cat and doghouse very hard, and even ran back and forth to the water room twice. At this time, Fong Beibei came back with Kiki, who had changed her clothes, and saw Poplar Fruit was sweating profusely, driving the water with the broom. He had already cleaned most of the cat and doghouse. "Kiki, you can't play in the water anymore," Fong Beibei said to Kiki with a smile. "Listen to Sister Beibei and stand aside. I'm going to help your father." She put Kiki, who was nodding, on the ground and was ready to get another broom. "No need, no need." Poplar Fruit waved his hand and said indifferently, "This kind of hard work can be done by a man. You don't need to do it." Fong Beibei thought for a moment and said, "Then I'll push the feed cart over." She walked outside, and Kiki followed behind her like a little tail. She thought that what Sister Beibei was going to do must be more interesting than what her father was going to do. The busy day almost passed in the blink of an eye. With the efforts of Fong Beibei and Poplar Fruit, and of course, with a little help from Kiki, the cat and doghouse and the corridor of the rescue station were cleaned up by Poplar Fruit. Even though Yang Guo had a good physique, he was sweating all over after doing so much work in such a hot and humid weather. "Are we going back like this?" Poplar Fruit pointed at Kiki and Fong Beibei, who were deliberately covering their noses, and said with a smile, "Look, Kiki fainted because of the smell." "Mim." Shishi nodded her head vigorously and said in a muffled voice, "Daddy stinks, stinks, stinks." However, when Yang Guo lowered her head to look at Shishi, Shishi screamed and ran away. "Baby, smell it." Poplar Fruit deliberately made a joke and stretched his sweaty arm in front of Fong Beibei. "I know you stink." Fong Beibei slapped away Poplar Fruit's arm and said angrily. Fong Beibei handed the towel that she had washed to Poplar Fruit and said, "There is a small bathroom at the third door on the right. It is for us to take a bath. Go and take a bath." In the end, she asked Poplar Fruit to take Dirty Gold into the bathroom and let it wash up before going home. Although it was very awkward to take a bath with a dog, Poplar Fruit quickly washed him and Gold. He put on the t-shirt he brought and the pants he wore before walking out. On the way back, Fong Beibei stretched her head out from the back seat and put her white and tender arms around Poplar Fruit's neck. She asked softly, "Uncle, are you tired today?" "Not tired," Poplar Fruit said energetically. "Working with baby is not tiring at all." "Then let's do it together next time, okay? Once every 2 weeks. Fong Beibei said in a begging tone, but her mouth curled up into a smile. She said, "Don't say no. I won't pester you to go shopping with me. It's just a small request. Just say yes." Fong Beibei was no worse than Song Qian when she was acting coquettishly. Poplar Fruit's heart melted. He held the steering wheel with his left hand and pinched Fong Beibei's nose with his right hand. Since he could not see her angry expression, he said with a smile, "How can I not be happy?" Chapter 831. What Mo Yang said in front of the reporters was nothing more than a topic for the netizens to talk about. The people who didn't know about Yang Guo's power couldn't possibly understand it. However, when Poplar Fruit stepped into the headquarters of Xinda Translation, the translators and staff members who had met him a few times before recognized him and looked at him with admiration. Only the insiders knew how powerful Poplar Fruit was, not to mention the fact that Poplar Fruit was a top translator in English and other languages. His achievements in literary translation were truly admirable. Literary translation was the holy land in the hearts of almost all translators and translators. Currently, literary translation was in a slump, and they might not earn as much as commercial translators. However, literary translation represented a higher level of existence after all. Going from commercial translation to literary translation was like going from the mountainous province of Guangdong to the mountainous province of Guishan. Poplar Fruit translated for Master Mo Yang, who had won the Nobel Prize. Not only did Poplar Fruit add fuel to the fire, He also had over 50 translations in over 10 different languages. In the words of an old translator who liked to play with words, Poplar Fruit was already climbing Mount Everest, chasing after the brightest sunrise, when we were still enjoying the cool breeze and blooming flowers on the hillside. Poplar Fruit hadn't been to the company for a long time, but his legend had been spreading in the company. Everyone was talking about everything that had happened to Poplar Fruit in the company. Now that Poplar Fruit was here, they were all excited. If their boss, Yarrow de Roy, didn't come to the company himself, they would have swarmed to him. Of course, if they heard what Yarrow de Roy said in the office, they would be speechless. Hee. Yarrow de Roy laughed. Poplar Fruit. Do you know what the most successful business I've ever done in my life is? Shindar translation has been opened all over the country, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. This was Yarrow de Roy's most glorious moment last year. Not only did he complete his grand plan, but he also made the Cinder Translation Company independent from the Cinder Group. Every time this big move was mentioned, Yarrow de Roy's face would glow. No. Yarrow de Roy stroked his balding hair and smiled proudly. My most successful business was finding you and bringing you to the company. Poplar Fruit was silent. Both he and Yarrow de Roy were lost in their memories. In Yarrow de Roy's mind, he recalled the time when Yarrow de Roy climbed up the simple and dark tube-shaped building, only to find out that Poplar Fruit had left his original address. However, he still persevered and inquired from many sources. He even disregarded his own identity and went to Poplar Fruit 3 times. Finally, after a few months of coaxing and pestering, he finally pulled Poplar Fruit into his company. The small amount of shares he paid at that time was considered a loss by the other executives after the rapid expansion of Shindar Translation Company. However, Yarrow de Roy was the only one who firmly believed that Poplar Fruit had a limitless future. Not only because of Poplar Fruit's talent, Yarrow de Roy also saw Poplar Fruit's good qualities of modesty, hard work, and tenacity. Throughout history, there were many talented and intelligent people, but only a small group of people who were not tempted by fame and fortune could become masters in the end. Now, Yarrow de Roy could already prove that his calculations were not a loss. Moreover, only a year had passed. In the future, Poplar Fruit had an even brighter future. Poplar Fruit's heart was filled with emotions. Yarrow de Roy and Poplar Fruit were like teachers and friends. Ever since Yarrow de Roy left the Foreign Trade Company, Yarrow de Roy became his first talent scout and had always supported him unwaveringly. At that time, he was ostracized and had resolutely resigned for Kiki. He only had a few tens of thousands of yuan left. Not only did he have to pay for his own rent and food, he also had to bear the responsibility of raising a newborn baby girl. At that time, he bought a can of imported milk powder for Kiki. Poplar Fruit was prepared to live on plain porridge and pickles. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit met Shindar Translation Company. Not only did he earn his first salary after leaving the company, he also found his own career direction. It could be said that Poplar Fruit's success today was inseparable from Shindar Translation Company's affirmation of him, and Shindar Translation Company's affirmation came from Yarrow de Roy's decision. After that, Yarrow de Roy invited Poplar Fruit many times. Although Poplar Fruit declined again and again, he was still very grateful in his heart. The real reason that Yarrow de Roy and Poplar Fruit's relationship to the point where they could ignore age and status was because of the dispute over the translation of the biography of Steve Jobs. Before Poplar Fruit had arrived in Beijing for the press conference, Yarrow de Roy had already helped to find someone to speak up for Poplar Fruit. That was the beginning of Poplar Fruit's attitude towards Yarrow de Roy. Even Poplar Fruit's acceptance of Yarrow de Roy's invitation to join the company was inseparable from this matter. If you treat me with sincerity, I will not let you down. The two of them praised each other in a mushy manner. Then, Yarrow de Roy raised his hand and hooked it around Poplar Fruit's shoulder. He smiled and led him to the floor where the Shindar Translation Academy was located. On the way, a few bold employees ran over and asked, "Boss, is teacher Poplar Fruit going to class?" This week's training class would be led by Poplar Fruit. This news had already spread throughout the company. Not only the ordinary staff, but even the gold medal interpreters in the translation department were envious. They were very envious of the 2 teams of interpreters who would be participating in this training class. They couldn't wait to participate in it themselves. Yes. Yarrow de Hua laughed. Otherwise, why would Poplar Fruit come to the company? He couldn't have come here to give you an autograph, right? Just now, when Poplar Fruit arrived, he was surrounded by a group of girls at the front desk. It was Yarrow de Hua who came out to rescue him. Those girls were purely fans. The pictures of Poplar Fruit that were circulating on the internet were so handsome. At this time, several interpreters from the translation department, including the 2 gold medal interpreters, also joined in. With longing in their eyes, they looked at Yarrow de Hua and said, "Boss, Teacher Yang is giving a lecture. Can we go over and listen?" Yarrow de Hua was stunned for a moment. He looked at Poplar Fruit and said, "Poplar Fruit, what do you think? There are people who want to listen to my class." Poplar Fruit sighed in his heart. Naturally, he wouldn't refuse. He smiled and said, "I'm fine with it. As long as the class can sit down and you don't disturb others when you go in." Yarrow de Hua nodded. He turned to look at the interpreters and said with a straight face, "Poplar Fruit is willing to give you this opportunity. Then, I won't stop you from pursuing progress, but remember, the premise is that you have to finish your work before you listen. That's for sure," a braver interpreter said with a grin. They pushed each other and hurried back to their posts. They had to finish their work quickly before they could listen to Poplar Fruit's class. Poplar Fruit and Yarrow de Hua gradually walked away, but some people could still vaguely hear Yarrow de Hua laughing heartily. "What is wealth? Poplar Fruit, let me tell you, a talent like you is the best wealth of the company." Chapter 832. There's still an hour left before we can go for lunch. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "So I won't be teaching this morning. I'll use this time to talk and introduce to everyone what we are going to do in the future." In the morning, he went to the classroom with Yarrow de Hua and met the first batch of 50 seed translators from New Translation Road Publishing House. After some introductions, Yarrow de Hua said a few words of encouragement. Just like that, half of the morning passed. After Yarrow de Hua left, Poplar Fruit sat on the table in front of him. His long legs touched the ground as he faced the group of students. Although the average age of the 50 people in front of him was in their early 30s and they looked very young, in fact, they were all older than him. If it was the Poplar Fruit of the past, let alone being as calm as he was now, he probably wouldn't even be able to stand steadily. However, Poplar Fruit's experience in the past 2 years was extraordinary, especially after the big scene of BA Lee Fashion Week recently. He could now calmly face many challenges. Speaking to these translation students for the first time, Poplar Fruit's voice didn't tremble at all. It was as if he was chatting with an old friend. When they first came in, the translation students were very excited when they saw Poplar Fruit. That was because Poplar Fruit was very famous. Seeing Poplar Fruit was like seeing a celebrity. But in fact, everyone still had doubts in their hearts. Such a young teacher, could he teach or even know how to teach? However, Poplar Fruit's calm performance gradually suppressed their restless thoughts. Moreover, they seemed to feel a kind of transcendental temperament from Yang Guo. It was not an overbearing aura, but an inexplicable ability to subdue people. "I believe that when you signed up for this training class, you all understood our future mission." Poplar Fruit's eyes twinkled as he said calmly but faintly with a hint of sharpness, "Our training class will not teach you how to advance from silver to gold, nor will it teach you how to translate the translation tasks given to us by customers. It has nothing to do with the Shindar translation platform. But it will be a catalyst, an opportunity for you to improve yourselves. Perhaps, after this training class, after your self-study and hard work when you go back, and perhaps after the second and third training classes, you will walk into the palace of online literature translation that is different from the traditional literature translation of the past." When Poplar Fruit said this, he saw that among the 50 people, most of their eyes were shining with desire, but a small number of people seemed to be struggling in their hearts. He knew why. Poplar Fruit smiled brightly, just like the neighbor's brother who gave people endless longing. He said, "Coming to this training class, I know that you all have the dream of literature translation in your hearts, and hope that your translated works can be published one day. Just like me, I would rather suspend my commercial translation job that earned me hundreds of thousands of yuan a month on the platform and resolutely devote myself to the translation of the biography of Steve Jobs. Although I worked hard for more than a month and was questioned by the whole country, in the end, I only received a few tens of thousands of yuan, but when you hold the new book in your hands, you will realize that all the hard work is worth it. Poplar Fruit clenched his fists, and his eyes seemed to show a deep nostalgia for the past. This kind of nostalgia was what the students in the audience also longed for. I know that too, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. You all have such a goal in your hearts, so you are willing to give up everything to pursue and fight for it. But at the same time, you have to bear the pain and give up on the good life in the past. I have calculated that a silver translator can earn at least 7,000 to 8,000 yuan a month. If you work hard, 10,000 to 20,000 yuan is not impossible. Isn't that right? Poplar Fruit saw the hesitant students nodding slightly, and he said with a smile, You all think that literature translation can't earn much money, right? At this moment, almost everyone nodded. This was the consensus of the industry. Except for a few talented translators, like Poplar Fruit, who could earn a lot of money through literature translation, the efficiency of making money through literature translation was really not as good as that of commercial translation. Poplar Fruit used the computer on the podium to open Amazon's website and found the best-selling web novel of New Translation Road Publishing House. The translator was naturally Poplar Fruit. There was no record of physical book sales at the moment. After all, it had only been on the shelves for less than a week. However, the sales of the ebook had already reached 500. This book had more than 3 million words, so on the price of the ebook, New Translation Road Publishing House's price was $12.99. In other words, this book's sales were close to $7,000. New Translation Road Publishing House and Amazon have a 70-30 split. Poplar Fruit said frankly. This rule could be found on the internet, so Poplar Fruit had nothing to hide. Let's assume that this book has earned $7,000, then our book can still make a net profit of nearly $5,000. Of course, our publishing house has just started, and our reputation is slowly accumulating. This book has just started selling for a week. We can foresee that it will sell more ebooks and paper books in the future. Everyone looked at Poplar Fruit in confusion. They did not understand what Poplar Fruit meant. In their hearts, what did the book sales have to do with the translator? Then, you may think about it. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, If the publishing house makes money, that's the publishing house's money. What's the use of telling us? We are the translators. After translating a book, we take the money and leave. Am I right? Yang Guo's sudden outburst of vulgarities stunned the translation students. However, these words struck a chord in their hearts and they couldn't help but laugh out loud. Then, there was a thunderous applause. You all have the same thoughts as me. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, Sometimes, I really want to scold the fuck. This society is not fair. Why should we work so hard to translate your book and earn money, and then we only get a small fee for our hard work? Yes. Some of the students shouted excitedly. That's not fair. Everyone was quite agitated. The scene was a little chaotic. The students were so excited by Poplar Fruit's words that they felt a little out of control. This was not what Poplar Fruit wanted to see, but he was still very calm, because he believed that he could control the situation. Do you know why New Translation Road is called New Translation Road? Poplar Fruit's sudden change of topic made everyone feel a little uncomfortable. But Poplar Fruit's calm expression calmed them down, and they thought along with Poplar Fruit's rhythm. Chapter 833. That's right. What does the name New Translation Road Publishing House mean? Everyone had a lot of questions in their hearts. Poplar Fruit saw that no one answered, but a few of the quick-thinking students had already thought of something. Their eyes were shining with anticipation. Poplar Fruit no longer kept them in suspense. He smiled and said, New Translation Road Publishing House. This name was given by the boss's elders. Zheng Yujie's father, who was about to take office as the first leader of Guangdong Province, could also be considered an elder. To the country and our Chinese culture, New Translation Road Publishing House means that we want to spread our glorious and rich culture to the world through translation. the Silk Road of the new era. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "This is the expectations of our elders. It is also the ultimate goal of our publishing house. But for us translators, of course, we don't have to bear such a heavy responsibility. We just need to treat the works in our hands with our hearts." Poplar Fruit pointed to the projected web novel and said, "That's enough. Then, New Translation Road means that the publishing house will provide us translators in literature translation with a brand new path, a path that breaks the norm." Poplar Fruit stood upright on the podium, as if his body was as tall as a mountain. The students below the podium looked at Poplar Fruit in a daze. They thought of the treatment of translators that Poplar Fruit had mentioned before, and they couldn't help but breathe heavily. The novelty of New Translation Road is reflected in our attitude toward translators. We would rather reduce the profit margin of the publishing house and strive for a win-win situation for translators, authors, and the publishing house, Poplar Fruit said, clenching his fists. "After saying so much, I know that if I don't throw out some solid information, you won't let me go." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "You also know that the publishing house and the authors share the profits. But this time, we share the profits with the translators. In other words, as long as the quality of your translated books is good enough and you sell enough, you can also make a lot of money. Take this book for example." Poplar Fruit pointed at the web novel that had a profit of $5,000 after deducting Amazon's channel fee and said with a smile, "The publishing house gave me a 30% cut." In other words, in just the past week, Poplar Fruit had made a net profit of $1,500, which was more than 9,000 RMB. 9,000 a week, that would be 30,000 a month. Moreover, the translators present were not stupid. They knew that literary translation was different from commercial translation. Commercial translation was a one-off business. How much they earned at that time was how much they earned. And literary translation was like planting a fruit tree in spring. From time to time, new fruits could be plucked from the tree. As long as people continued to buy them, these books would still have a chance to bring them profits. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Do you think we've earned enough?" "I can predict that today's sales results are just the beginning," Poplar Fruit said proudly. "We'll sell more in the future." Poplar Fruit held the podium and smiled at the students below. "You should know that our publishing house has only been established for less than a month, but we've already made a name for ourselves in the industry." "Why?" Poplar Fruit asked. "Because you've translated so many of Master Mo Yang's works." A student replied, "With the translation of Master Mo Yang's works, who won the Nobel Prize, our publishing house will quickly gain widespread attention." "Yes." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "This is a good start for us. However, don't put all your hopes on Master Mo's works. After all, the popularity of the Nobel Prize will fade. Moreover, if your translation skills are not good enough, you won't be able to achieve success. We'll talk about this later. I still need to explain the benefits to you and let you know what kind of future this path will give you." Poplar Fruit said. "The share between the translator and the publishing house is between stable and fluctuating. Translators with no achievements will get less than 10%, and it will be adjusted according to the sales." Poplar Fruit explained, "If the sales of your first translated book are really good, the publishing house won't deduct your profits. 10% of the profits will be given to you. Next, the second book will be changed according to the situation of your first book." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "We'll also divide the translators into bronze, silver, and gold medals. However, above the gold medals, there will be platinum medals. Bronze medals will be a fixed share of 10%, silver medals will be 20%, gold medals will be 30%, and platinum medals will be 40%. Poplar Fruit gave a thumbs up and said with emotion, "If you can translate a work that will take the world by storm and reach the top 10 of the sales rankings, you won't need to wait for the next book. The publishing house will directly change your contract and change it to a platinum contract." Poplar Fruit's eyes sparkled as he said to the 50 translators who were starting to get excited, "Gold and platinum translators are important resources for the publishing house. You have to understand that once you reach the gold medal level, you can advance and retreat together with the publishing house. If you reach the platinum level, the publishing house will be willing to act as your agent and use all its resources to plan the marketing for you. It will even help you fight for more reputation and benefit. Platinum should be the goal that all literary translators should pursue. Let your translated works be recognized by the market and recognized by the whole world. Even earn the respect of all literary translators, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. His tone was soft and seemed to be without passion, but the power contained in his words had already set off a huge wave in the hearts of the 50 translators below the stage. I must reach the platinum level. One of the translation students imitated Poplar Fruit and clenched his fist. He placed it in front of his eyes and raised his head with a determined look in his eyes. Of course, the evaluation of a translator's rank is not only based on the sales of the work, but also the evaluation of the translator's ability, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. After all, the sales of the work is related to the quality of the original work. In order to protect the original author, our library is also divided into different ranks. Only translators who reach a certain rank can come in contact with higher quality book. Therefore, working hard to improve your translation rank will be of great help to your future promotion. Hearing Poplar Fruit's words, the students' motivation to improve became even stronger. You can guess that the basic rules for a translator's promotion are similar to Cinder's. The rank is not fixed. It will be evaluated based on the sales of your previous book and the translation level. If your previous book's translation level plummets and the sales drop, then your translation rank will be correspondingly lowered. Poplar Fruit poured cold water on them. Therefore, you have to keep working hard to maintain the pace of progress, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Chapter 834. After a day of classes, Poplar Fruit did not feel tired at all. Instead, he returned home in high spirits. In the field that he was good at, Poplar Fruit could teach for 3 days and 3 nights without feeling exhausted. Pushing open the door, Poplar Fruit saw Kiki and Goldie cheerfully greeting him. However, the light in the room was not turned on, so it looked a little dark. Turning on the light, the whole living room and dining room was brightly lit, as if the haze was dispelled, making people feel comfortable. Poplar Fruit picked up his daughter and asked with a smile, "Why are you alone at home? Where is Sister Bebe?" "I'm here." Fong Bebe stood up from the sofa in the living room and said with a smile. The careless Poplar Fruit did not notice that Fong Bebe was not as lively as usual. Just now, she was sitting quietly on the sofa in the living room, her figure hidden in the shadows. No one knew what she was thinking. It's autumn and winter. It will be dark at 5 o'clock. You should turn on the light earlier, Poplar Fruit said. If you don't turn on the light and read in such a weak light, your eyes will be damaged. Fong Bebe's face bloomed with a soft smile. She walked to Poplar Fruit's side, held Poplar Fruit's arm and said, "Uncle, I'm hungry." "Kiki is hungry too." Kiki patted her round belly and said, "And Goldie is hungry too." Hearing its name, Goldie raised its head, looked at its masters in confusion, and wagged its tail. Poplar Fruit rolled up his sleeves and said with a smile, "Okay, I'll cook for you right away." Poplar Fruit was busy in the kitchen. Kiki was holding her 2 Barbie dolls in the living room and telling Goldie a story. Fong Bebe, on the other hand, was sitting on a chair in the dining room, quietly looking at Poplar Fruit, who was surrounded by smoke. She seemed to have never been so quiet. Even when she was unhappy and threw a tantrum with Poplar Fruit, Fong Bebe would not show such a low pressure in front of Kiki. During the meal, she had a lot on her mind and did not taste the food. Poplar Fruit asked with concern, "Baby, what's wrong? Is it not to your taste?" Fong Bebe bit the chopsticks, her cherry lips red. She shook her head at Poplar Fruit and said with a coquettish nasal voice, "I want to eat that fish." Poplar Fruit stood up quickly and used the spoon and chopsticks to pick up a large piece of fish for Fong Bebe. He even dipped it in the sauce and put it into her bowl. Although he was slow, Poplar Fruit still felt that something was wrong with Fong Bebe today. However, Poplar Fruit thought that it was her period, so he loved his girlfriend wholeheartedly. Fong Bebe's eyes were shining. She was a little moved. She sniffed and said softly, "Uncle, thank you." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "You don't have to thank me." Kiki was already full. When she saw the movement, she pulled Goldie over and shouted, "Papa, Kiki also wants to eat fish." Go, go, go and play by yourself. You're full, but you still want to eat fish. Poplar Fruit smiled and pushed the troublemaker away. Sure enough, she didn't want to eat fish at all. She just wanted to attract her father's attention. As soon as Poplar Fruit moved, she giggled and ran away. Today, Fong Beibei took Kiki to take a bath. Poplar Fruit sat at the desk in the living room and made a summary of his performance today. This small apartment was too small. It couldn't be compared with the high-end apartment Poplar Fruit used to live in. However, when Poplar Fruit bought a new house next year, space and study would no longer be a problem. After a day of classes, Poplar Fruit still gained a lot. It wasn't that he learned anything from the students, but that he constantly found his shortcomings in the course of classes. For example, he didn't speak concisely enough. Although he had knowledge, when he said it, he didn't reorganize his words. He was too confident in his own strength. Although what he said was right, since he could do better, why not work harder? Another example was that Poplar Fruit's logic was a bit messy when he was teaching. It seemed that it wasn't enough to prepare an outline for himself before class. He still needed to give himself a complete outline to make his thinking clearer. Then, he wouldn't say things that were all over the place. There was also a suggestion made by a student. It was to let Poplar Fruit help to summarize the translation of common words, such as fighting spirit, immortal energy, core formation, nascent soul, and so on. Poplar Fruit himself did in the process of translating the first 5 novels. He collected many cases of translation between different languages and made a lot of English definitions for these common words. These were all stored in Poplar Fruit's mind. If necessary, he could summarize them at any time. However, Poplar Fruit didn't intend to give these vocabulary to them directly. As a literary translator, the most important thing was the translator's creative ability. This was because the vocabulary was dead. No matter how big the vocabulary was, it couldn't cover all kinds of imaginative web novels. Only by unearthing his own thinking and creative abilities would he not be stuck when he encountered words that had not been translated before. Poplar Fruit would give the vocabulary to them, but he wouldn't give it to them casually. Poplar Fruit had already thought of the tests. Just as Poplar Fruit was sometimes typing on the computer and sometimes drawing in the notebook, Fong Beibei came out of the shower. She dragged a chair over and leaned against Poplar Fruit, watching him work. Poplar Fruit put down the pen and reached out to rub Fong Beibei's hair that hadn't been blown dry. He smiled and said, "You don't mind my sweat?" "Of course not." Fong Beibei smiled and said, "It's not smelly at all." Poplar Fruit turned his head to look at Kiki. He then turned back and lowered his head to look at Fong Beibei. He pouted and said, "Come, kiss me, Donald Duck." Fong Beibei looked at him with a smile and said with some disdain, "I'm not going to kiss you. You don't stink, but your mouth stinks." Poplar Fruit raised his palm and blew on it. He asked doubtfully, "It doesn't stink." "Aya, you tricked me." Poplar Fruit saw the smile in Fong Beibei's eyes. He called out and took the initiative to kiss her. Fong Beibei didn't move. She just closed her eyes and responded. Fong Beibei, who had just taken a shower, smelled fresh, like mint leaves after the rain. Poplar Fruit lingered with her for a while before straightening up. He smiled and looked at Fong Beibei, whose face was still slightly red. Fong Beibei gasped softly and looked at Poplar Fruit with nostalgia. "I'm going to take a shower first." Poplar Fruit stood up and twisted his body. He smiled and said, "Although it's not smelly, it's true that I sweated during the day." Fong Beibei sat in the same place and looked up at Poplar Fruit. She hesitated for a moment and suddenly called out, "Uncle, what's wrong?" Poplar Fruit heard the voice and stopped. He turned around and asked. Fong Beibei wanted to say something but hesitated. After a while, she smiled and said, "Nothing, hurry up and take a shower. I always take a shower very quickly." Poplar Fruit bent his arms like a bodybuilder. He smiled and bragged. Chapter 835. Fong Beibei's heart was in a mess. She behaved abnormally for several times tonight. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit didn't notice, but she felt very uncomfortable in her heart. She felt that she had hidden something from Poplar Fruit and did something against her conscience. Everything was because during the day, someone suddenly came to find her. Since she became famous on Weibo, students from other departments often came to see how beautiful the legendary beauty was. Some media even tried to contact her for an interview, but they were all rejected by Fong Beibei. It could be said that it was rare for someone to come to find her. However, the person today was unusual for Fong Beibei. The person who came was called Gan Juanji. To a certain extent, he was Fong Beibei's first love. Although she was still ignorant about love at that time, the green clothes and white dress at that time, the banyan tree at that time, the small notes passed on the desk, and the teachers' and parents' opposition at that time, were all the sweet and sour taste of first love. However, although Fong Beibei didn't understand love at the time of her first love, Gan Juanji's departure and the subsequent 3 years of spiritual healing caused Fong Beibei to really understand love and be afraid of love. This also caused Fong Beibei to be afraid to go further with Poplar Fruit. It caused her to run out of the door in fear after Poplar Fruit's confession, and it caused her to ask in the rain, "Do you really love me, or do you just want to find a stepmother for Kiki?" Let's not talk about all the causes and effects, let's talk about the present. When Fong Beibei was called out of the classroom in a daze, she turned the corner and saw the man who had been haunted by her dreams. He was different from before. He seemed to be a little more mature, with a new trend of returning from overseas. His smile seemed to be less pure and sunny. It was indeed haunted by her dreams. However, with that experience, Fong Beibei felt nauseous and disgusted every time she saw Gan Juanji, even if it was just a photo of her former classmate. "Beibei." Gan Juanji opened his arms and said with a smile on his face that he thought was very sunny, "I'm back." Fong Beibei didn't move. She frowned. Her delicate and beautiful face didn't have much expression, but her eyes had the problem. Fong Beibei was very resistant to him. Gan Juanji awkwardly put down his arms. He and Fong Beibei were the same age, and sometimes the mature act was vulnerable. Under Fong Beibei's gaze, he couldn't maintain a warm attitude. This was completely different from what he had imagined. Gan Juanji went abroad to study for a year and came back. He got a degree from an American college that sounded scary but was actually useless. He was ready to enter the management of his family's company. He was the future successor. After coming back for 2 months, he didn't do anything big. Instead, he drove a luxury car everywhere to show off his wealth. He especially liked to show off his wealth in front of his former classmates. The so-called class reunion was just a tool for him to enjoy the sunlight that others admired. By chance, he saw a popular couple on Weibo, and he recognized Fong Beibei at a glance. He was Fong Beibei's first love, but wasn't Fong Beibei his first love too? Although his personality changed greatly after he left high school, it wasn't an exaggeration to describe him as a playboy. After recognizing Fong Beibei, Gan Juanji suddenly recalled his first love, who was as pure as water. "At that time, my daughter was still thin and short. Now, she had grown up. Whether it was her figure or her face, she was a 1 in a million beauty." Since he knew about Fong Beibei, Gan Juanji suddenly lost interest in showing off his wealth. He began to reminisce from time to time. Even when he found a new novelty target in the bar, he couldn't help but think of her image. As for whether or not he did anything vulgar with Fong Beibei's photo, only Gan Juanji would know. Anyway, for a few days, Gan Juanji almost didn't want to eat or drink. It wasn't that he suddenly regretted it, but he remembered that Fong Beibei was the only one that he didn't sleep with among his many girlfriends. Not only that, when he was in love for the first time, he only held hands with Fong Beibei. How could this be? The seeds of evil thoughts were like branches and vines, crazily spreading and growing. Gan Juanji decided to take the initiative to find Fong Beibei, and then trick her into his hands again. As a rich second generation, Gan Juanji had a good appearance. Although he didn't look like a little fresh meat anymore, with the branded clothes on him, he still gave off the feeling of a charming man. Moreover, Gan Juanji knew that Fong Beibei was a very simple girl, and also a girl who was very nostalgic. So what if she had a boyfriend? He firmly believed that when he talked about his past, Fong Beibei would definitely be hooked. When he first came, Fong Beibei hadn't returned from abroad yet. After half a month, when Gan Juanji came again, he really found Fong Beibei. However, things didn't develop as he expected. He opened his arms, and Fong Beibei rushed over like a moth to a flame. "Beibei, I'm back." Gan Juanji was a little embarrassed, but he still maintained a smile and said, "Because I missed you, I came back from abroad. Beibei, believe me, give me another chance, I won't leave again." Fong Beibei's face was stiff, and she frowned at him. Gan Juanji's words, in Fong Beibei's ears, were full of loopholes, and were more lies than lies. She sneered in her heart. As early as 3 years ago, Fong Beibei had already seen his true colors. Gan Juanji was still chattering, but Fong Beibei wasn't willing to listen anymore. She suddenly said, "Go. I don't want to see you." Gan Juanji was choked by Fong Beibei's words, and he almost choked. Then, when he saw Fong Beibei turn around and leave, he became anxious. He strode forward, grabbed Fong Beibei's wrist, and said anxiously, "Beibei, listen to me, I'm serious." Fong Beibei seemed to have been touched by something dirty, and she shook off Gan Juanji's hand forcefully. She looked at him with disgust, and shouted, "Get lost." There were more and more onlookers, and Gan Juanji couldn't bear it anymore, so he left dejectedly. This matter seemed to have passed just like that. Fong Beibei didn't let it go so easily. She hid at home and struggled for the whole afternoon, but in the end, she still chose to keep quiet. In the end, she even called out to Poplar Fruit to confess to him, but she didn't dare. The hesitation and fear in her heart made her not dare to say it out loud. Gan Juanji should know to back off, right? Fong Beibei could only pray that this first love, who had disrupted her rainy season 4 years ago, wouldn't appear again, and wouldn't disrupt her peaceful and happy life. Finally, this foreshadowing that had been buried for more than 100 chapters has been drawn out. Chapter 836. Fortunately, Gan Juanji didn't appear in Higoshiyama University's campus for the next few days. Fong Beibei secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She had been under a lot of pressure. On one hand, she had to worry about Gan Juanji pestering her. On the other hand, she had to worry about how angry Poplar Fruit would be if he found out that she had kept it from him. When Poplar Fruit went to class, Fong Beibei helped to take care of Kiki. Of course, if Fong Beibei also had to go to class, she would bring Kiki to Poplar Fruit's teacher's wife's place. In fact, Kiki preferred to play with her teacher's children. She even asked Fong Beibei to bring her toys over with her in a small school bag so that she could share them with her friends. This week, Poplar Fruit didn't revolve around the 2 training classes of Shindar translation every day. When he had time, he would also go back to school and bring Fong Beibei to teach the children in Xiong village. Under Poplar Fruit's guidance, Fong Beibei could finally teach the children. As the multidimensional teaching had received very good policy support from the school, the 6 grades could finally be taught separately. Although there was a shortage of experienced teachers, the children didn't mind. They were very happy to learn and communicate with so many older brothers and sisters. However, the experience of teaching for the first time was always bumpy. Fong Beibei was a straight A student, but she wasn't a demon like Poplar Fruit. When she was teaching mathematics to the 5th grade children, she was so nervous that she forgot what she was going to say. Looking at more than 60 children quietly looking at her, Fong Beibei was so anxious that she was about to cry. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit was by her side. When he saw that the situation wasn't right, he quickly went up to help. He took over Fong Beibei's words and talked to the children for 5 minutes, allowing Fong Beibei to reorganize her thoughts before going back to the stage. After that, Poplar Fruit joked with Fong Beibei about this matter, saying that she still had a weakness. Fong Beibei threw herself on him in embarrassment, hitting and pinching him. The 2 young lovers were very noisy. However, for straight A students like Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei, setbacks could never defeat them, because they were good at summarizing and learning. After Fong Beibei experienced this moderate failure, she realized her own shortcomings. She even took the initiative to ask for guidance from Poplar Fruit, which made Poplar Fruit so happy that his smile reached his ears. Poplar Fruit was already looking forward to Fong Beibei's improvement in the next class. However, he didn't have the opportunity to follow Fong Beibei for the 2nd class, because after the week-long training in Shindar ended, Poplar Fruit had to fly to Beijing. Back then, he had made an appointment with director Li En to translate the subtitles for him. After half a year, his copy finally arrived in Beijing. Of course, Poplar Fruit was only lucky enough to watch the movie once. When the copy was sent over, the main purpose was to hold a screening meeting for all the major cinema managers in the country to watch it and then decide how many screens to allocate for it when it was released. Poplar Fruit wasn't worried about Li En, because there was no need to worry. Who was Li En? He was a top international director who had won 2 Oscars, and even won an Oscar for Best Director. He was the pride of the Chinese people. His movies, whether good or bad, commercial or artistic, as long as his name was on it, the box office wouldn't be bad. However, to Poplar Fruit, this kind of travel was very annoying. In October, he flew from Ba to America, then flew back from America with Fong Beibei. After returning to China, he was invited to Changju's Mango TV to record a show. After returning for a week, he had to fly to Beijing again. In a month, Poplar Fruit didn't spend more than half of his time in Yangcheng. Why did he feel like he was a big boss who often flew around for business? This wasn't the end. Poplar Fruit felt that the last few months of 2012 were very busy. Not to mention other things, in December, he had promised his teacher to go abroad to attend an award ceremony in Sweden. This was enough for him. Fong Beibei also had some complaints, but more than that, she was reluctant to leave. At night, she helped Poplar Fruit pack his clothes and said, "Uncle, I won't be able to see you for many days." "Of course not." Poplar Fruit squatted beside her and smiled. "I'm just going to Beijing to watch a movie. I'll be back after that. It won't take more than 3 days. Who would travel so far just to watch a movie?" Fong Beibei pouted. She knew that this movie wasn't a normal one, but she still complained unhappily. Poplar Fruit pulled Fong Beibei, causing her to lose her balance and fall into his arms. "Uncle." Fong Beibei pouted, but she quickly stopped protesting because Poplar Fruit had already wrapped his arms around her and hugged her tightly. "Kiki is still here," Fong Beibei said with a trembling voice. Poplar Fruit pulled Fong Beibei into his arms and leaned his head against hers. His nose smelled the fragrance of Fong Beibei's body, and his face gently rubbed the hair behind Fong Beibei's ear. He smiled and said softly, "What are you afraid of? She's already asleep. Moreover, I didn't do anything bad." Fong Beibei's body suddenly trembled. She sensitively felt that Poplar Fruit gently kissed her ear. It seemed that this was her weak point. Poplar Fruit only lightly touched Fong Beibei, but her entire body went soft. "Don't." Fong Beibei's begging voice came to an abrupt end. She let out a cry, and the ending sound dragged out. At this moment, Poplar Fruit gently licked her small and exquisite, white as jade ear. His arms closed and pressed against Fong Beibei's flat stomach, hugging her even tighter. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit only tasted a little. He didn't wait for Fong Beibei to stop and let go of her blushing ears. He just sat with her face close to his. Poplar Fruit grabbed Fong Beibei's soft and boneless hand and held it in his palm. He said softly, "Baby, don't worry. I just need to do it for work. I'll be back in 2 or 3 days. When I come back, I'll accompany you to watch a movie, okay?" Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei whispered into each other's ears and said with a smile, "Then I'll pick a good movie and wait for you to come back." Fong Beibei was comfortably held in Poplar Fruit's arms. She sweetly smiled and said, "I want to watch a lot of movies." "No problem. Let's watch 4 movies in a row, no, 8 movies, from morning to night." Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "Until the end of time." "I don't want to. I'll die of exhaustion." Fong Beibei said with a grin. "Baby. Ian. You smell so good." "Hee, really? Really? Let me smell it again." "I won't let you smell it. You strange uncle. Why, little girl, you actually dare to resist. Uncle is telling you, today uncle not only wants to smell it, but also wants to kiss it." Chapter 837. Zhang Yujie was a girl that Poplar Fruit found very difficult to face recently. He knew that even if he didn't tell her clearly, she would definitely find out from the internet that he had a girlfriend. This gave Poplar Fruit a headache. What should he say when he saw her? It wasn't that Poplar Fruit didn't want to make things clear to Zhang Yujie. If possible, Poplar Fruit also wanted to draw a clear line between the two of them, so that the two of them could simply be good friends. She was Poplar Fruit's confidant, and Poplar Fruit was her confidant. Wouldn't it be good to keep the line between friends and not cross it? Poplar Fruit was sure that he could do it. He didn't want his relationship to become complicated, and he didn't want to lose a good friend who trusted each other because he had a girlfriend. But he didn't think that Zhang Yujie could do it. Poplar Fruit understood Zhang Yujie's feelings for him, just like how he understood his own feelings for her. Zhang Yujie had never been stingy with expressing her feelings. Love was love. She couldn't control whether he accepted it or not, but he couldn't stop her from loving him either. Of course, she wanted to throw herself into the flame that was Yang Guo without any hesitation. Even if she was burnt to a crisp, even if there wasn't a trace of ash left, she firmly believed that Yang Guo would be touched one day. Poplar Fruit had a headache about her. He was touched. It wasn't that he wasn't moved, but he really couldn't be moved easily. So he could only keep a straight face every time. But it seemed that this girl was getting fiercer and fiercer each time, and it felt like she was going from bad to worse. He thought that the moment he saw Zhang Yujie, the two of them would be very awkward. But Poplar Fruit realized that he was the only one who was awkward. Auntie. Kiki broke free from her father's hand and happily ran towards Zhang Yujie, shouting loudly, "Kiki missed you so much." As usual, Zhang Yujie was wearing a trendy Loewe crystal scale dress wrapped in a fiery red windbreaker. The dress only reached her hips a little. Looking from the front, her round thighs were wrapped in black stockings, and her thighs were faintly discernible, revealing her feminine seductiveness. She had already become the focus of the airport crowd. Many men could not help but squeeze forward, pretending to look back casually. "I miss you too." Zhang Yujie smiled brightly. She squatted down and hugged Kiki in her arms. Before the men who couldn't help but look at her clearly, she had already stood up with Kiki in her arms. "Auntie, Kiki wants a toy." Kiki's memory of Zhang Yujie in her mind was all those exquisite and fun toys, and of course, beautiful clothes. Zhang Yujie was definitely a fashion expert when it came to choosing clothes for Kiki. The clothes she bought for Kiki were all Kiki's favorite clothes. Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly. He felt that his daughter was too gullible. As long as there were good things for her, it was easy for her to have a good impression of others. Zhang Yujie happened to see Poplar Fruit's bitter smile. She raised her eyebrows, glared at him, and said discontentedly, "What? Handsome Yang, you're not happy to see me now, are you?" Poplar Fruit cupped his hands, shook his head and said, "How could that be?" He felt that a lot of people around him were looking at him. It was burning hot, and it was the jealous eyes of those men. Damn, so what if you're handsome? You actually got such a good girl. "I'm leaving with Kiki." Zhang Yujie waved her windbreaker, turned around, and left with Kiki in her arms. "If you want to be admired by thousands of people here, then stay here." Poplar Fruit shook his head, dragged the suitcase, and left with her. In the car, because of Kiki's liveliness, Poplar Fruit didn't feel any estrangement between him and Zhang Yujie. Instead, he chatted with Zhang Yujie as usual. "When are you going to resign?" Poplar Fruit asked curiously. "At the end of the year, when the sales of your last book in Xindar come out, I'll leave." Zhang Yujie smiled and said, "I think, with director Li's movie adding fuel to the fire, your book will definitely sell very well." Poplar Fruit curled his lips. He didn't like to take advantage of others. Although it was a foregone conclusion, and it was impossible not to take advantage of others, he still felt a little unhappy and said, "Even without him, my book can still sell well. In the past, it was the translation that cheated the book, but now my translation is in line with the reading taste of the people." Okay. Zhang Yujie smiled and said, "I know that your hippie disease is acting up again. It's not that you can't take advantage of others, but since there's such a good opportunity, why don't you take advantage of it?" Poplar Fruit shrugged and said, "I know. If you know, then why are you complaining?" Zhang Yujie complained and said, "With your character, you can't be a boss in your life, and only know how to bury your head in books." Poplar Fruit wasn't angry and said with a smile, "That's right. Otherwise, Why would you be the boss and I be the employee? Besides, I don't have any ambition in my life. I just want to be a quiet little scholar. Zhang Yujie glanced at him and then focused on driving. She held back for a while and said, "Then I'll continue to be your boss. Anyway, I won't let you become a poor scholar." Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "Okay. I'm absolutely assured that you'll be the boss." Poplar Fruit and Zhang Yujie didn't mention anything about Poplar Fruit and his girlfriend. Poplar Fruit muttered in his heart, "That's good. I don't have to bother comforting her. By the way, my father will arrive in Guangdong province in the early part of next month." Zhang Yujie suddenly said, "If you're bullied by others, don't worry. Tell me, and I'll help you." After saying that, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. She laughed so hard that her Maserati was also twisting and turning on the road. It was so scary. Poplar Fruit quickly reached out to steady the steering wheel and said angrily, "Okay, I know your thigh is thick. Drive carefully. I don't want Kiki and I to fall because of you. 3 lives in 1 car." To be honest, Poplar Fruit didn't think that Zheng Timing's arrival in Guangdong province would have any effect on him. Poplar Fruit didn't even bother to know who the previous leader of Guangdong province was. He was high and mighty, and he was also the leader of a province. He was the parent of more than 100 million people. How could he control him? Besides, Poplar Fruit was just a little scholar, not a civil servant who wanted to climb up the ranks. He didn't need to beg others for anything. "Come to Beijing, you can stay at my house." The car stopped outside the zebra crossing. There was a red light on the opposite side. Zhang Yujie stopped laughing and finally became serious. She asked with a little desire in her tone. Poplar Fruit was stunned for a moment. He shook his head and firmly said, "No, I'll stay in a hotel." Zhang Yujie was silent. She rested her left arm on the window and gently bit her white jade-like fingers. Her eyes were looking out of the window. There was nothing to see there. The sky in Beijing was grey and there were only tall buildings. "Okay." The green light turned green. Zhang Yujie pushed the gear and stepped on the accelerator. The Maserati roared away. Chapter 838. The next morning, Poplar Fruit and Zhang Yujie went to greet director Lian before the screening. Kiki was led by Zhang Yujie's assistant to wait in the corridor outside. From the fact that Lian personally flew back to China, it could be seen that he attached great importance to the Chinese market. One had to know that even if he didn't come, the theater chain wouldn't have missed out on his schedule. But his return gave the theater a lot of face, so they were willing to put in more effort in promoting the movie. Poplar Fruit just happened to be on his way back. Poplar Fruit was not narcissistic enough to think that the director, who was so busy, would fly back all the way for a nobody like him. He had a lot of things to do for the global release. "Poplar Fruit is here." Lian was probably still jet-lagged. He had just gotten up and was wiping his face with a towel. He was wearing a traditional singlet and long johns. He didn't look like a director at all. "You haven't washed up yet?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. He had to take the initiative. Although Zhang Yujie's status was higher than Poplar Fruit's, Poplar Fruit was, after all, more familiar with Lian, and he was a man. "I washed up, but I just got up. I'm going to take a shower later." Lian smiled and said, "Poplar Fruit, I'm very busy this time back. I have a dinner appointment at 12 o'clock. I don't have time to chat with you." "It's okay." Zhang Yujie smiled and said, "We know you are a busy man, so we came to visit you early. We won't disturb you for too long." "That's good," Lian said with a smile. "Poplar Fruit, there's only one screening in the afternoon. Do you want to stay and I'll ask someone to show you another screening?" He needed Poplar Fruit to help him translate the subtitles, but he had watched those subtitles over and over again in the past. "No, I'll just watch one screening." "That's enough," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. He said it casually, but his words contained his unwavering confidence in his ability. "That's good." Lian smiled and said, "By the way, are you interested in attending my premiere? The premiere in China will be 2 days later than the one in the United States. It will be held in Beijing on the 24th of next month. You're a big star now. I often hear about your news abroad. The more far-sighted one knew how to take advantage of the situation. Lian was the same. He sent an invitation to Poplar Fruit, hoping to borrow Poplar Fruit's momentum. Not only was Poplar Fruit the #1 male model in China, but there were also rumors in China that Poplar Fruit was the #1 male model in Asia. Of course, it was just a domestic media hype. Originally, the leaders of Dongshin Publishing had been invited to attend the premiere. They would also be given some time to promote the new book that was released at the same time. Now, he sent an invitation to Poplar Fruit because he wanted to achieve a win-win situation. His movie would be hyped up, and Poplar Fruit's new book would be noticed by more people. However, he still underestimated Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit shook his head decisively and said with a smile, "Mr. Lian, thank you for your invitation. However, I'm really not free at the end of November because there will be a training at that time. At the beginning of December, I will be accompanying Mr. Mo Yang to Sweden to receive an award." Poplar Fruit's rejection stunned Lian. However, when Mo Yang was mentioned, he was filled with respect and didn't dare to be dissatisfied. He knew that his movie was only for commercial interests, and it was even a foreign investment. Mo Yang receiving an award was a national event. If it were him, he would know what to do. Lian didn't know that Poplar Fruit was just making things up. There was no training at all. It was true that he would go to Sweden at the beginning of December, but at the end of November, he was completely free. He rejected because he was lazy and didn't want to come. It's just a movie premiere. Poplar Fruit didn't care too much about it. He thought that staying at home with his girlfriend and daughter and having a simple life, translating a few books and writing a couple of papers in Guangzhou was more important than running around for fame and money. Zhang Yujie glanced at Poplar Fruit but didn't say anything. She wanted to talk Poplar Fruit out of it, but considering his personality, she gave up the idea. She wasn't the one that Dongshin would send to the movie premiere anyway. It would be a senior vice president. After chatting with Lian for a while, Poplar Fruit and Zhang Yujie said goodbye to each other. They picked up Kiki and Zhang Yujie's assistant and left the hotel. "Where are we going now?" Poplar Fruit asked. It was only 9 o'clock. There was still a long time before the movie premiere started at 3:30. Even if they were going to eat, they had already eaten breakfast and it was still early for lunch. "We're going to take a look at Wanhe Tianyi." Zhang Yujie turned to look at Poplar Fruit and said helplessly, "Brother, you're the boss. You've invested money in it, so why don't you care about it?" Poplar Fruit let Kiki play with his thumb as he smiled embarrassedly. "I do. I care about it. I watch every episode of Unexpectedly." Chichi abruptly raised her head and smiled beautifully. She happily waved her arms and sang, "Who would have thought? La 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 tilde Kiki can sing too." Chichi pushed her little head against her father's chest through the woolen hat and said proudly, "Chichi likes big brother Wang Dachui the most." "Kiki, you've acted in Unexpectedly. Do you still remember?" Zhang Yujie asked with a smile. "I remember. Kiki is the cute little Neza." Kiki started singing again. "Neza, Neza, you're amazing. The cutest kid in the world is my little Neza." Listening to Kiki's tender voice, not only Zhang Yujie, but even the assistant who was driving couldn't help laughing. Poplar Fruit smiled. He was a little embarrassed because this song was adapted by Sister Na for Kiki. When Kiki sang it, it sounded like "Mirror, mirror, 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 who's the prettiest?" However, Poplar Fruit was confident because of the weekly update of Unexpectedly. He smiled and said, "See? Actually, I care about it." Zhang Yujie glanced at him and said with disdain, "You only know Unexpectedly. Let me ask you, do you know what other web series Wanhe Tianyi released?" Poplar Fruit's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He shook his head. "Something else." Zhang Yujie smiled contemptuously. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked at Poplar Fruit coldly. She asked, "Do you know what's the situation with Le Dong Joyeux?" Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said, "It seems like the game is going to be officially launched, right?" Zhang Yujie laughed and said, "It's been launched for a long time. See, you don't care at all, but you don't agree." In the middle of the month, the open beta ended, and it was put up for sale on all the major mobile platforms. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.